Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Never Stopped Hiding? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Mama had told him to hide. Izuku hadn't understood at first, insisting that they should find a hero if there was danger. But his mama was an adult and usually knew what was right, and she had said that the heroes would not be able to help them. She had given him his yellow backpack and sent him off after he had just gotten home. He was a good boy, and though he wanted to go hide in the playground that he and Kaken visited often, he knew that it was a place that his mama could easily find him. He walked. No one seemed to see him. No one stopped him. He kept walking. He walked past the playground. His daycare. The elementary school that Mama had said he would attend next year. The corner shop where the nice quirkless, like him, Granny worked, who always gave him a small piece of strawberry candy when he came with his mama when she did her shopping. He waved at her. She waved back. He continued walking. Izuku didn't know how long he had been walking. He was starting to not recognize the stores around him, and it was getting darker every minute. Mama had never taken him this far from home. The buildings seemed to get taller and taller as neon lights lit up the storefronts, flickering occasionally with a buzzing sound. He was tired. The green-haired boy carefully looked around him before making his way into an empty alleyway. Shadows seemed to deepen as he walked past bags of garbage, an overfilled dumpster, and the rattling of air conditioners. This was okay, right? No one was here. He could hide here. Carefully moving the cables so he could duck under them, Izuku found himself in a small space next to a broken unit. He took off his backpack and carefully sat down on the ground, clutching it to his chest. Mama had told him to hide. Izuku always won in the games he played with his mama. He was going to be a hero, so this would be good practice. Even though Mama had said sorry to him when he asked. He would hide. Hide even better than All Might could. Izuku was hungry. The green-haired boy had been hungry for a while now. He had checked his backpack early on, only finding a copy of his family's registry, his hero notebook, a few granola bars, and a bottle of water. The granola bars hadn't lasted him too long, and the water had barely lasted an afternoon in the summer's heat. He was lucky that there was a nearby leaky drain pipe and that it rained yesterday. He had put his empty bottle out to collect the rainwater, hoping to save it for later. It was all gone now, though. He buried his face into his now empty arms. His backpack had been stuffed as far as he could push it on the top of a broken unit. He didn't want it to get wet when the rain was falling. Days had passed. Izuku was hungry. He was so hungry. He hurt. He clenched his fists into his shorts, almost biting his lip when he irritated one of the small feathery bumps on his forearms. They had started appearing on his arms and face a few hours ago. Izuku had thought he had known what pain was. How it felt. But Kaken's explosions were almost nothing compared to this. Even his eyes hurt. It was his back that hurt the worst, though. His stomach grumbled and he clutched at it, curling up in a feeble attempt to stifle the noises. He'd only been by himself for a few days, and already, he's learned that it's better to be silent. He was dying, wasn't he? Was this how people died? He hurt all over. The scrabble of nails against a plastic bag, the twitching of whiskers. A rat. His mama's whispers in his ears, memories that he loathed to let go. Izuku, those are dirty. If they bite you, you can get very sick. His back itched ferociously. He wanted to scream. But he loved his mama, and she told him. She said to him while ruffling his curls, giving him a final kiss on the forehead. You need to go, Izuku. You need to hide. Promise me to hide. He remembered nodding his head. It was only 2 days after his first errand after all. He could take care of himself for a few hours. Mama's voice sounded much more worried this time, though. Her eyes were shiny and looked like how his eyes did right before he would cry. Don't cry. I'll be back. I'll hide and then you'll find me. You said hide and seek, right? She gave him a watery smile, eyes crinkling, and nodded. I love you, Izuku, okay? Never forget that. I love you. Scurrying snapped him out of his thoughts, his eyes quickly finding the plump rat. Izuku could not have known this, But in that moment, his pupils dilated, leaving only a sliver of green visible. He was hungry. He had to hide, but he was so hungry. His fingers clenched at the ragged shirt he was wearing. Rats were animals, right? And animals were meat, he knew that. Pigs made the pork of his favorite katsudon after all. However, Mama always cooked the meat she would buy at the supermarket. Mama wasn't here though. Would he be scolded if he didn't cook meat? He wasn't even allowed to use the stove at home. But if he ate, would he stop dying? He had to live if he wanted to hide. Mama won't be able to find me if I'm dead. Izuku clumsily stood, his back twinging and eyes intently tracking the rat's minute movements. He needed to do this. The itching got worse, and it took all he could to not crumple to the alley wall, to lay against the cold metal of the bricks, for some measure of relief. He breathed in, the same way he did after Kaken would sometimes punch him, doing his best to push away how much he wanted to scratch away at himself. He leapt forward, teeth gritted and fingers held like claws. Flew. Downy wings exploded out of the boy's back, flight feathers barely half-grown. A flap, another flap. The bloody ragged remains of his shirt were left behind along with his favorite shoes, as he extended his talons and struck, skidding across the ground. The owl who was once a boy gorged, sharp beak tearing into the warm flesh and swallowing. In a few minutes, the entire rat was gone and the owl tilted his head, sounds of footsteps coming to his ears. He had fed now, and now that he was sated, he had to find a roost. He had to hide. Inko sat at her dining table. It had been almost 3 days since she had told her son, her poor son, to leave, to hide. It was 3 days since she had seen her son. It was also 3 days since Hisashi had last come home. 3 days since she had found out about the corruption of the police. Of the heroes who had refused to get involved in family matters when she had told them that her husband was a villain. They had told her that she was being dramatic. Hisashi had never gotten physical with her, but would that have even mattered? A villain was a villain. It was an accident that she had even found out. She had been sorting the laundry when she had found 2 small coins left forgotten in a pair of Hisashi's slacks. The imprint of birds were barely visible on their surfaces. She had absent-mindedly placed them aside in her apron pocket as she continued on with the chores, the news providing some pleasant background noise. The washer had only just been started, the detergent not even put away yet, when the television suddenly blared with the sound of breaking news. It was the last thing she expected. Finding out that the small bird coin was a trademark left behind whenever suspected buildings were set on fire, well, it was unpleasant to say the least. Hisashi had come home that night smelling of ash. Izuku had scrunched up his nose slightly, but had retreated to his room with minimal urging. The next morning, Hisashi had left bright and early with only a narrow glance at Izuku. Inko could almost feel the proverbial burn of the coins in her apron pocket. That afternoon, she had sewn a little pocket hidden in the lining of her son's yellow backpack, carefully slotting the coin in. She had updated her will, taking Hisashi off and leaving everything she could to Izuku. She made sure Hisashi could never have custody of her son. Making sure that she had it signed and notarized, she sent it off in the mailbox across the street. The green-haired woman quickly packed her son's bag, in a rush to finish before Izuku could get home. As she zipped up the bag, she could hear a small knock on the door. "Izuku! It's open!" As the door slowly swung open, she could clearly remember his toothy grin, the floppy hat he held in an arm, hugging it to himself. The green of his hair, her hair, ruffling from the blast of the air conditioner. The red sneakers that they had gone together to buy only last week for his birthday. "I'm home. This could be the last time you see him." She did her best to smile through her morbid thoughts. "Welcome home, Izuku." She bent down taking his hat and school bag, swapping them with the backpack she had prepared for him, ignoring his confused look. "You remember the rules for hide and seek, right?" "Uh-huh," he nodded guilelessly, carefully looping his arms into the straps of the bag. "I played that with Kaken yesterday." "Never found me though." "You must be very good at it then, if Katsuki-kun couldn't find you." Inko managed a small laugh. Oh, she loved him. "Do you want to play a game with Mama?" Predictably, Izuku nodded, almost hopping in place, confusion already forgotten. "Can I seek Mama?" He leaned forward, lips pressed in a pout, hands propped against her arms while still hopping in place. Kaken never lets me seek. Sorry, Izuku, moving her hands to grasp his. Inko lightly squeezed them reassuringly. I want you to hide from me. It's important, all right? But why? His green eyes, her eyes, gleamed with unsuppressed excitement. Is it like a hero mission? Izuku, listen to me, okay? She let go of his hands, resting her own on his shoulders, still so small, so narrow. We're both in danger. That's why you need to hide. But Mama, we can tell the heroes. He pointed a finger at a poster hanging on the wall behind her. Heroes help people. The heroes won't help us, honey. Inko breathed out, shaking her head when her son tried to interrupt her. I asked, and they said no. You need to go, Izuku. She blinked away the tears that wanted to fall, shifting just forward enough to brush a kiss on her son's forehead. You need to hide. Promise me to hide. He's still so young. Izuku nodded uncertainly, and then nodded again, more certain. Mama, don't cry, he began, and Inko startled, blinking away more tears just hearing that. I'll be back. I hope so. I'll hide and then you'll find me. Please. You said hide and seek, right? Good boy. Smart boy. My boy. She nodded, giving him the biggest smile she could muster. I love you, Izuku, okay? She hugged him tightly, trying to etch the moment in her mind. Never forget that. He's still so small. She loosened her hug reluctantly and lightly turned him around to face the still open door. I love you. I love you. One small push to his back. Go hide. Please live. And with that, Inko had closed the front door, fingers shaking as she locked it, the click resounding in the empty entryway. It was like a bell toll to her ears, chiming an announcement to death. It had been 3 days since then. 3 days since she had seen Izuku. She wonders if anyone had realized anything. She wonders if anyone had found him. Not yet. Not while Hisashi is still out there. It wasn't the best of ideas, she knew. But what else could she have done? She had panicked. Badly. She had just wanted Izuku to be as far from home as possible. Hisashi had never wanted a child, usually just ignoring Izuku when they shared the same space. But now that she knew that same Hisashi was a villain. A real villain. Not just a common street criminal like those that ran rampant in the area they lived in. She wasn't as stupid as to think that Izuku could hide for long. Izuku was a smart boy, but he was only 6. If there was anything she knew about her son, it was that he loved heroes. They were his joy, his passion. It was only a matter of time before he would go search one out. She hoped it wouldn't be the ones that she had met on their patrol nearby. What could she do? What more could she? I'm home. He's home. This is it then. Welcome home, Hisashi. Inko spoke, her voice fragile and thin. How was your day? It was pretty great. A small puff of smoke escaped his mouth as he chuckled. Not bad at all. She stood up and took a step towards him. Hisashi, her husband, looked at her, eyes glinting in a manner which she had never seen before. A wry smile tugged on his lips, another puff of smoke dissipating between them. She had married a villain. Is there something wrong, Inko? This is it. She shook her head, a nervous laugh falling from her lips. Nothing's wrong. If he's here with me, he's not out there where Izuku is. I made dinner. Impulsively grabbing his hand in hers, Inko tugged him closer, lightly pushing him towards a chair. It's your favorite. It's warming in the oven. I'll go dash. Inko, Hisashi quickly pulled her back, interrupting her. Dear. There's no need to fuss like this. After all, the scent of smoke wafted under nostrils as he leaned down to rasp. I already know. Did you think you could fool me, my dear? It's over. I almost can't believe it. His hand was gripping hers like a vice grip, immovable despite her best attempt to shake him off. You should have kept your nose out of my business. I'm going to die. You should have left my tokens where you had found them, Hisashi growled out, eyes flaring like embers. You've signed your own death warrant, Inko. I'm going to die. It's all right. Leaning forward, he caught her other hand, encasing it into his. I might even make it painless. Can I stop him? You've just got the worst luck, don't you? Hisashi, a villain, mockingly continued. even trying to snitch to the co-dashed. I loved you, Inko whispers, cracked lips twisting painfully. Hisashi, please. What can I do? Oh, Inko, Hisashi, her husband, a villain, her husband, chuckled, smoke now stinging at her eyes. I did too. But I've always found the things that I loved, they burn the brightest. Inko opened her mouth to scream, her voice not even making it out before Hisashi's lips met up with hers, curled in a smirk. BLEW. I'm sorry, Izuku. The last thing Inko saw was fire. Please live. I love you, Izuku. The owl didn't know much of the world that he was a part of, but he knew that he had to live, to hide. His wings unfurled and he flapped a few times, jumping up and wedging his talons into the slits of a nearby air conditioner unit until he could clamber on top of it himself. Shuffling himself deeper into the small crawl space until he could feel the soft fabric of his bag, he wiggled himself in further until he no longer could. Only then did he let himself relax. The owl ruffled his feathers before settling to rest. Tomorrow was another night. He would live. It was a nice night. Izuku perched himself on the windowsill of his newest home, eyes sweeping the streets below. It was different from his last roost. His last one was an appropriated bird's nest in a tree by the wooded area near where he, human him at least, had used to live. He wasn't human anymore though. He was an owl now. It was his quirk. It had to be. Izuku hadn't paid it too much mind and it had taken him a while to get used to living as a bird anyways. He could barely even fly when he first started. He barely even knew what was going on when he first realized he no longer had fingers. Everything was scary. Things were so much bigger when you were smaller. The air conditioner alley that had been his home for those days had been so loud, the rumbling noises never stopping. He spent most of his time huddled against the wall, only coming out to hunt the rats that were attracted to the remnants of food that littered the alleyway. He had left as soon as he could reliably fly, making his way back to his house under the cover of night. Hiding was easier done when there were less people around. He found that he preferred the night more now. Izuku had stayed in the area for a long time, had checked his house every night, but he had never seen his mama again. No one at the windows. No one going shopping for groceries. No Kaken asking him to come play. Izuku spent his time listening instead. He heard many things. He had quickly realized that owls had really good hearing. Hiding in the branches of a tree, he listened. Matsumoto-san, are you headed to the shopping street? Of course. The super sale starts this evening. I'm hoping to stock up on ingredients for sukiyaki. Ishihara-kun. Let's go to the arcade together. If it's with you, Kotori-chan, I'm happy to spend a few hours there. Headed home, Tokiya? Nah, I've got cram school. And then one early evening he heard it. Hey, did you hear what happened to the Midoriyas? Spontaneous combustion, right? Scary. Keep it to yourself, but I heard the sun is gone too. Do you think the house is going to get sold? I hope not. Living near a house where someone just burned to death like that is creepy. Right? They should just tear it down and rebuild over it. Izuku had flown off in a flurry of feathers right after that. It was that night that he figured out that owls couldn't cry. The very next night, he started flying further than he ever tried. He didn't want to stay there. He didn't want to see the destruction of his house. If he couldn't live there with his mama, he couldn't stay there at all. It was no longer his home. It was hard to resist turning back when the sun started to slowly rise, painting the sky in a motley of pastels. He had hidden himself in an empty planter, the overhang of the balcony covering him from sight. He had continued flying during the night, diving for rats whenever he sighted them with no humans in the vicinity. Izuku didn't even have to think about gobbling down rats now with his instincts leading him. The guilt he once felt for not cooking his meat had been pushed aside. Izuku didn't even know if owls ate cooked meat. He eventually did spend a few hours with an outdoor yakitori stand in view and didn't feel the urge to grab one even when he was hungry. He had left soon afterwards, sighting a rat which he had gleefully dove on top of and finished before making his way back to the sky. That had been a long time ago too. Snow fell and then it got hot again. Izuku wondered if he was 7 yet. Did owls even celebrate birthdays? He didn't know. It was at these times that he wished he could find out, but he was pretty sure owls weren't allowed in libraries. And that was fine. Owls didn't need libraries. All he needed was a home and food. And he had that now. Izuku had made his roost in the top floor of an abandoned building, the open windows providing easy access for entering and exiting. His yellow backpack, the last thing his mama had given him, was stashed in a corner, along with other bits and bobs that he would sometimes pick up that piqued his interest. So far, he had a few bottle caps, his molted feathers, pencils, and the erasers that were picked off carefully from the pencils. He hooted lowly to himself in satisfaction, the sound echoing in the otherwise bare room. Pushing himself off his ledge, he quickly made his way up to a taller building, his wings easily catching an updraft. He landed, talons carefully grasping the guardrails. He had learned his lesson early on when he nearly slipped off trying to hold onto the metal. He would have preferred a brick and mortar, but those tended to be too low for what he wanted to see. As he bobbed his head slightly, eyes taking in everything below him, he felt a small bubble of protectiveness. This was all his. This was his new home. His territory. Mostly his territory at least. After all, there was a hero that patrolled here at night sometimes. And Izuku loved to watch him from afar. He had nicknamed the hero Owlman at the beginning. Those ambush attacks looked just like how he caught his meals, only learning that his actual hero name was Eraserhead when he had flown in closer, hearing the man calling in villains that he had taken down. That was when he started picking up pencils. Izuku wasn't sure he wanted to be a human again, but if he ever did, he'd like to write in his notebooks again. It's not as if being an owl was bad. Being an owl was better than being dead. Like Mama is. Of course there were things he did miss from before. Like his fingers. And his room. Maybe even Kaken. But most of all, Izuku missed watching All Might's super cool debut video. But now he could watch Eraserhead running and hopping across roofs all night if he really wanted to. It was like live hero TV. So, Izuku supposed being an owl was fine. He could live without fingers and his old room. He could definitely live without Kaken, who had called him names all the time now. Could even live without All Might's video. Mama would never be there to open the video for him again. Like this, he didn't need anyone. He had food, water, and a home. No one would be able to find him. People thought he was dead. Izuku was an owl now. He was safe. Aizawa Shoyuda was tired. Granted, he was often tired. But working in the depths of the seedy underground always seemed to drain whatever energy he did have, spit it out onto the ground, and then stamp on it a few times for good measure. Heroics was a dangerous occupation as a whole, but underground heroics was a different species on its own. The worst of human nature seeped through the cracks of society and made itself apparent in the darkness of night. Despite that, he could never regret choosing to go underground. He wanted to save and help others. Taking out the scumbags that facilitated danger out in the streets was just a bonus. Sure, it was never-ending work, but there were times where he could grab a minute or two for himself, pour a cup of coffee down his throat, and then relish the caffeine for another minute before swinging himself back up to continue his patrol. Occasionally, he'd even have time to enjoy a jelly pouch while out and about. That was what he found himself doing right now. Shoyuda perched himself on the roof of an apartment building and unscrewed the cap off of the pouch, immediately sking up the contents with a slurp. Leaning lightly against the guardrails, he looked down over the city. Everything looked so much more innocent from up here. The streetlights were like pinpricks against a dark canvas, their incessant buzzing undertone unable to be heard from a distance. Buildings jutting up towards the sky, like a road of puzzle blocks for him to traverse on. And more regularly than ever, the hooting of an owl. That owl was an elusive thing. In the last few months, he'd been hearing it more and more frequently. Seeing the bird, however, was a different story. It may as well have been a ghost, leaving nothing behind but the reverberation of its call. Shoyuda had never been that interested in owls, not like he was cats, but he had ended up checking out small video clips of them in action one lazy afternoon and decided then and there that yeah, they were pretty cool. He agreed with a comment he had seen on an owl compilation video. Owls were like cats with wings. Yoo-hoo. Shoyuta snapped his eyes up in the general direction at which the hoot came from, scanning buildings for anything vaguely owl-shaped. He had nearly passed over the blob, a stark black against the white of the full moon, eyes continuing to travel the roof of another building, but a small shift in movement tugged his attention back. He squinted. That was an owl, all right. He could just make out the two tufts of feathers on the head swaying from a small breeze. It was too dark to make out specific details, but that was fine. It would be nice to give Hisashi an update on the mysterious owl that he had been hearing when he was on duty. And in a blink, the owl leapt down from its perch, body seamlessly blending into the dark with wings open, and flew off, quickly disappearing from his line of sight. Shoyuta huffed into his capture weapon, pushing himself away from the railings and tossing his empty jelly pouch into the dumpster parked right by the apartment building. That owl had the right idea. It was time to get back to work. Crime waited for no one. Had Eraserhead seen him? Izuku had fled as soon as he realized that the hero was looking in his direction. He promptly made his way to the nearest park and into a tree's branches. The owl dared not to even move a muscle. Thoughts raced through his head, feeding into one another and blurring. Mama said to hide. He can't find me. What if he finds me? Does he know it was me? I need to hide. I need to hide. Izuku stayed there until the sun started rising, the dark of night being slowly chased away. He spent that time trying to settle his thoughts. He couldn't see or hear any people yet, but he could hear the morning warbles of songbirds and the coos of pigeons welcoming the new day. He couldn't stay out any longer. This was too out in the open. He breathed in. Twice. Flinging himself off the branch that he had been occupying, Izuku flapped, wings barely wavering as he soared up. He was thankful that flying came so easily with practice. With how he felt right now, he wasn't entirely sure he'd be able to fly without outright slamming himself into something. He still did his best to not stray into the widening patches of sunlight. By the time he had made it back to his roost, Izuku was exhausted. Sunbeams were streaming in through his window, so the owl laid himself out on his stomach, wings splayed out, finally able to relax again. He soaked in the warmth, eyes sliding half shut, already getting drowsy. Was this okay? Did he need to leave? He didn't want to leave. It had taken him so long to find a place like this. There was even a small lake in one of the bigger parks a few minutes from here. Good water was hard to find, especially since he didn't want to drink from dirty puddles on the streets. People stepped on dog poops sometimes after all. This was his territory. He shared it with Eraserhead. And Eraserhead was a hero. A really cool hero. He knew that Mama had said that the heroes wouldn't help, but he had been watching Eraserhead for so long now. Izuku's mind wandered idly as he finally dozed off, talons curled up snug underneath him. If Mama had asked Eraserhead for help, would the hero have given it to her? Shoyuta had gotten home just before the sun had started to rise, shedding his capture weapon and flopping himself onto the couch for a quick nap before his husband would wake up to start his day. It felt like he had just closed his eyes, merely having a long blink, before he heard the shower turning on and the consequent trill of English lyrics. He pushed himself up, reminding himself that he could get some actual sleep after Hisashi left for the radio station. Breakfast was one of the few times where they could spend some time together considering their conflicted work schedules. Shoyuta quickly put together a simple and light breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, serving them on 2 plates which he then placed on the kitchen table along with a bottle of ketchup. He shook it and squeezed out the cherry red condiment onto Hisashi's eggs. 2 dots for eyes. And a shallow arc for a smile. Perhaps it was a bit silly of a tradition, but it was harmless, and Hisashi tended to be more upbeat on days he sent him off with a smile. Even if it was made of ketchup on his eggs. As he put the finishing touches on his own eggs, with just a shake of salt and pepper, Hisashi walked in, his blonde hair already tied in a half ponytail. "Sho!" he exclaimed, a grin splitting his face. "Is that a smile just for me?" "Shut up," Shoyuta scoffed, the faintest of blushes marking the tips of his ears. "Who else would it be for?" Hisashi only laughed in response, making kissy lips at him before pouring out a cup of coffee to bring with him to the table. Lime eyes studied him carefully, flicking to his torso and then to his legs, peering out from behind prescription red-rimmed glasses. "Your patrol went well?" The blond man finally sat down at the table, another grin tugging at his lips as he looked down at his scrambled eggs again. No knife fights at least? I saw the owl last night, Shoyuta said instead as he forked up a bite of scrambled egg. He won the knife fight, thank you very much. It was kinda far from me, but it's definitely out there. Oh, that's neato. Hizashi replied, easily accepting the change in subject, eyes gleaming in interest. Next time, you should snap a photo or something. Owls aren't exactly common in the city, you know. Shoyuta hummed, the tone non-committal. I want to see the owl too, Sho. Hizashi whined, lips in an exaggerated pout, his fork waving and nearly flying out of his grasp. The only birds I ever see are pigeons that keep shitting on the balcony. I don't see them, he mumbled as a reply. They must like you. You know what'd be cool? Hizashi exclaimed as he swallowed the last of his toast. Not waiting for a reply, he continued, if your owl came by and just ate those fuckers. Like blamcab'em. Then I wouldn't have to spend any of my precious time cleaning up pigeon sheets. And your owl would have dinner. Not my owl, the dark-haired man rolled his eyes, and I'm pretty sure owls don't blam any kabams, Zashi. They're silent predators. Geez, you party pooper. The blonde grumbles with fondness still apparent in his voice. It'd be kick-ass though. Yeah, whatever. Shoyuta returns quietly. Don't you need to leave? Oh shit. Hizashi glanced over at the clock with wide eyes, and swiftly swept the remains of his eggs into his mouth. Shoulda said that sooner. I've got the dishes, waving away the radio. Host who was hovering over the empty plates, Shoyuta hip-checked him as he made his way to the sink. Don't be late. You're the best. Hizashi gave him a dazzling grin as he smacked a loud kiss on his cheek. Thanks for the smile. Oh, shut it. I'm headed out. See you later. God, he loved that man. It had been a few nights since Izuku had watched for Eraserhead. Don't get him wrong. He still thought that the hero was awesome. He was even more awesome than he first thought actually. Izuku hadn't seen or heard anyone looking for him, even though he was sure that Eraserhead had at least caught a glimpse of him perched on the building. That meant that either Eraserhead didn't know the owl was Izuku or he didn't care that the owl was Izuku. Both were good options. Izuku was glad. He and Eraserhead could coexist without any issues if it was like this. Plus, he really missed his nights of hero watching. It reminded him of when he would watch All Might's debut video or when Mama had allowed him to watch hero fights on TV. That wasn't something he could do again, but this was close enough for him. It was enough. Izuku's mama was gone. She had said that heroes and police wouldn't help. Izuku shouldn't expect any help. Izuku didn't need any help. It would have to be enough for Izuku to watch Eraserhead help others. Because Izuku didn't know what else he could do. With a finishing nibble to one of his soon-to-be molted feathers, the owl flew off into the night ready to once again seek out the pro-hero that he wanted to see again. Shoyuta hadn't heard any hoots in the last few nights. He wasn't exactly worried per se, but he knew that wild animals like owls didn't always fare well in the busy city. It was already a fair amount of luck that owls tended to be nocturnal, already avoiding a lot of the general populace. He ended up checking Hero Network for any alerts on missing animals from nearby zoos. Honestly, he wasn't sure he was relieved or not finding that all the zoo animals were accounted for and that the local owl wasn't a wanted escapee. The owl had to have come from somewhere. However, zoos were not the answer. But where else could it have come from? It was entirely possible that it could have been someone's pet. An owl that was human-reared could likely be well adjusted to living in the city. Shoyuta didn't think it was a pet though. If it was an escaped pet, he's certain that there would have been measures to track, capture, and return it back to the owner. If it was a released pet, he's sure that it likely would have originally gone to some animal rehabilitation shelter to prime it to release back into the wild. He was sure it was a wild owl. But deliberately choosing to make a home in the human-infested city when the sky offered endless roads to better, and probably cleaner, places? Illogical. The decision made was one he didn't mind though. It was such an insignificant thing, but he had grown fond of the nightly hooting that accompanied his patrols. At least there's plenty of food in a place like this, Shoyuta mused as he turned a corner, peeking into a silent side street, catching a naked rat tail disappearing into a trash bag. Those things could get huge. Yoo-hoo. He spun, eyes already scanning for the owner of the hoot. It only took a few seconds to place where the sound had come from. The owl, who was perched on some craggy overhang, hooted once more before flying off, presumably to catch their meal. I forgot to take a photo for Hisashi. Maybe next time. Shoyuta turned, using his capture weapon to pull himself up onto a nearby roof. He would never admit it aloud, but his heart did rest a touch lighter, knowing that Owl was fine and not dying some horrid death in a dumpster or something. It wasn't as if he could really keep an eye out for a wild creature that could fly about as it wished. And if he had volunteered to be on the task force of an exotic animal smuggling ring the next day, well, no one but him had to know about his reasoning. Izuku had a patrol route of sorts. It depended on how hungry he was and if he felt dusty or not. If he did feel in need of a bath, he would visit a bird fountain that was located in one of the smaller parks. He'd then hunt in the park for stray pigeons that weren't with their flock. He had also noticed that there were mice in the park, which were a nice snack if they came out scrounging for food where he could hear them. If he was already clean, preening and all already taken care of, he'd take up watch near one of the dumpsters that he had already marked down in his memory as one that was almost consistently very full. Izuku always made sure that he never hunted at the same dumpster too often before moving on to another. He didn't want the rats to start avoiding the area. After he had eaten his fill, he'd fly up to one of the taller buildings to watch the city. It was usually around this time that he would catch his first glimpse of Eraserhead. He doesn't know how long he spends up there, but when he knew the sun was going to rise soon, he would leave, making his way back to his roost. Early on, when he was still new to the area, he would go exploring every night. It only made sense to figure out the best places to find his next meal or where to get fresh water to drink or bathe in. It also helped to figure out places he should avoid. It was a weird instinct he had, one he had to fight, to avoid humans altogether. He was thankful that being an owl let him hear and see so much better. It was much easier to live alongside people when they never noticed him around in the first place. Sure, Eraserhead knew he was around, but so far nothing had ever happened even with the hero knowing about his existence. Izuku was relatively certain the dark-haired pro was safe. Izuku wasn't sure he'd ever find someone safe again. Mama was gone and Kaken had stopped being safe ever since he had told him that he was quirkless. Daddy. Hi Asature. Izuku carefully sounded out the syllables in his mind. He had never been safe either. He remembered telling Mama about his thoughts, and while she hadn't been too happy to hear what he thought, she had told him to trust his instincts, to believe in his gut feeling. Izuku knew he wasn't wrong in saying that his instincts were what allowed him to live. It had taken him a long time to properly figure out the differences between the owl instincts and his own, human, thoughts and urges. It had taken him even longer to accept that both were just himself, just the new Izuku. That was the reason why Eraserhead was safe. The very first night he had sighted the elusive hero, he was torn between excitement and moving to leave the area immediately. His owl instincts had screeched at him, recognizing the man as a predator, an apex predator. It was obvious at that time to him that this hero had already claimed this territory as his own and that he'd be trespassing if he remained. 2 more nights had passed before he had convinced himself to stay. That things would be safer with a hero in the area. Izuku was glad he did stay. He didn't even really know Eraserhead. All he did was watch and occasionally hoot to catch the hero's attention for a few seconds, only when he wasn't fighting and when he was alone, of course. Izuku knew they had something in common though. They both protected the city at night. Eraserhead patrolled and took down baddies while Izuku caught rats and sometimes pigeons, so they couldn't make a mess in dumpsters or multiply so quickly that they would be everywhere. Izuku knew that Eraserhead did much more than he did, but that was alright. Izuku was only an owl. And owls couldn't be heroes. That really didn't stop him from watching the hero as he did his work though. He was careful to not perch onto tall buildings so as to not give away his location by his silhouette and also not get too close so that his eyes would be visible to the man. Izuku had been pleased to find out that he had kept the color of his eyes as an owl, but even he knew that owls didn't have green eyes. It was one of his already clean nights. Izuku had been awake since the early evening, the sky streaked in orange. He had spent his extra free time preening his feathers and nipping off the erasers from a few new pencils he had picked up the previous night. When the sky had finally turned dark, Izuku had left his roost and gone hunting by a dumpster. It didn't take him long to catch a few rats, the ravenous owl devouring them quickly while still on the ground. When he had finally been sated, Izuku left to go find Eraserhead. It didn't take long, especially since it was so much easier to find things, like that cool scarf that Eraserhead used when you were higher up. Eraserhead was fighting today, Izuku noted. He had seen a few of the heroes' fights, but rarely did he see him going against more than 3 people at the same time. He was going up against 5 this time. For now, Eraserhead really was cool. Izuku watched as the pro swung around hooking his scarf to an adjacent fire escape, slamming his booted foot into the face of one of the remaining men. A flash of silver caught the owl's eye. Izuku recognized it as the glare of a knife under light. Eraserhead had a knife he would use to cut the people he captured loose from the main portion of his scarf. This wasn't Eraserhead's knife though. Eraserhead wasn't even looking in that direction, currently preoccupied with the 2 that were double-teaming him, forcing him against a wall. Izuku might not need any help, but it looked as if right now Eraserhead did. Before he could think of anything else, he found himself pushing off from his perch. Eyes were already locked onto the knife in one of the goon's hands. As the pro ducked under a punch, Izuku dove and screeched at the same time. The armed man startled, the blade of the knife only slashing lightly into the hero's shoulder. With his talons outstretched, Izuku easily snatched the knife away from its owner. "What the F dash, my knife?" he heard from behind him. "You have an attack bird?" Izuku flew upwards, landing with one clawed foot and balancing onto the neck of a lamppost, the other foot still grasping the stolen knife. While the owl carefully shifted the knife so that he was gripping onto the handle instead of the blade, Eraserhead quickly took down the other 3, Izuku being ample distraction. The owl watched cautiously as the pro squinted up at him, his bloodshot eyes clearly visible. He pulled his phone out, calling in his takedown, before fiddling with it and quickly snapping a photo. Hizashi is never going to FING believe this. Izuku bobbed his head, cooing. Who was Hizashi and why did Eraserhead want a photo? The owl wasn't sure, but he was still curious enough to not fly off straight away like he wanted to. The hero did get injured after all. Maybe if Izuku had seen the knife earlier or if he had flown faster, Eraserhead wouldn't have gotten hurt. Izuku really hoped he was okay. He could see the blood that stained the knife he still had. "Thanks." The owl blinked in reply before cooing again. Izuku hadn't been expecting thanks, but it gave him a warm, fuzzy feeling. He liked it. "Could I have the knife?" Izuku dropped the knife immediately, the metal clanging against the ground. As the pro hero bent to pick it up, Izuku made his escape, flapping silently into a planter filled with flowers. It was irrational to worry about the hero, Izuku knew, but he couldn't stop himself from worrying. He would follow the hero home tonight. Just to make sure he would be alright. Shoyuta had a FING night. He didn't know what was more absurd. The owl involving itself into a fight, his fight, and stealing a knife? Or him talking to the owl afterwards as if it could understand what he was saying. It didn't take long for the police to arrive, and after a quick statement, where he didn't mention any knife-stealing owls, thanks, he continued with his patrol. Thankfully, the rest of his shift passed by uneventfully and he made his way home ready to bandage his cut and get some rest. The rest of the night was a blur as he treated himself in the bathroom and collapsed gracelessly into his and Hizashi's shared bed and fell asleep as soon as his head touched his pillow. When he woken up in the morning, he wondered briefly if he had hallucinated up the whole night. Perhaps it was a quirk he didn't manage to cancel in time? A bleary-eyed check into his phone's gallery only confirmed it was no hallucination. Hizashi was already humming in the bathroom, getting ready for the day. At times, Shoyuta still couldn't believe he had married his high school sweetheart. But even he knew that what they had together was something he never wanted to be rid of. But by the gods, if Hizashi left his loose hair clogging the shower drain again, he would make the blonde eat it. Shoyuta made himself get out of bed, meandering his way to the kitchen. Setting the kettle to boil for some tea, he quickly fell into the practiced motions of cooking a traditional Japanese breakfast. Aizawa Shoyuta had grown up in a very traditional family. With a strict father at the helm of the household, Shoyuta had ended up spending large portions of his childhood in the kitchen watching his mother at the stove creating their meals. As he had gotten older, he started helping out more and more. The length of time to bake fillets of salmon. The ingredients that best complemented a miso soup. The flick of the wrist to make the nicest shaped tamagoyaki. He learned it all right at his mother's elbows. Even now, when he very rarely had the time to create a meal like this, he enjoyed it when he had the chance to. Today, Hizashi had an afternoon patrol and a night shift at the radio station. It left their morning free for once, without having to rush through breakfast. The dark-haired man made sure to bake an extra salmon fillet for Onijirai that Hizashi could drop off at the radio station for midnight snacking. "What's cookin', handsome?" Hizashi sashayed himself into the kitchen with a grin, his hair bundled up in a rainbow scrunchie. "Smells tasty." "Just the usual." Hizashi raised an eyebrow looking at the simmering soup full of tofu and seaweed. "Well, my usual." "Your patrol go well?" The blonde squinted at him. "You're in a suspiciously good mood today and it's still morning." "You hate mornings." "I saw the owl again last night." Shoyuta grinned unabashedly as he stirred his soup, giving a nod to his phone that he had left on the coffee table. "Even got you that photo you wanted." "Oh shit." The radio host whooped in glee as he hurried his way to the phone, tapping the passcode in with no pause in motion. "You the man." A beat of silence passed as Hizashi stared at the photo that was taken. "That's a big bird show." What's it got there?" "A knife." "What the F dash dot?" Hizashi's eyes very nearly bugged out before he repeated himself in quirk-activated English. "What the F dashed?" Shoyuta spun with ladle in hand, eyes flashing crimson, erasure activating in annoyance, causing the blonde man to sputter and sheepishly apologize. The dark-haired pro turned back to the stove with a frown to check in on the salmon. Hizashi continued his questioning with just a touch more hysteria in his voice. "Why's it got a knife?" "Stole it from one of the thugs I was going to take down." "Did you get stabbed?" "No." "Did anyone get stabbed?" "No." "Do you think the big bird has a quirk?" "I don't think this is normal bird behavior." Shoyuta paused in the middle of removing the baking tray from the oven. Was it possible? Sure, he had thought it odd that a wild animal would choose to live in the city, but would a wild animal with a quirk feel the same way? It hadn't done anything to him, despite him citing it more often than ever now. Now that Hizashi had brought it up, he couldn't think of anything else but that possibility. That owl did have bright green eyes. He had never seen any owl with that kind of eye color. Was it just the color of the eyes that was a quirk? Or was it something like an intelligence quirk? Shoyuta groaned. This was really not how he wanted his morning to go. He had wanted a nice quiet morning with his husband, not intense thought experiments about the possibility of a quirked predator making its home in the city. A wild animal that seemed to prefer the cityscape instead of anywhere else it could travel? That knew to take a knife away from someone else? That also seemingly understood human speech? There was a quirk involved. Shoyuta was sure of it. Was there anything he could do in this situation? If it was any sort of intelligence quirk at play, then all he had to do was gain the trust of the wild owl. Anything else could be reasoned out later. Izuku was lonely. It was something he experienced often enough even when he had been a human, but on some nights, it just really got to him, making everything feel worse. It was like a cold flame inside him, infecting everything it could get its greedy little fingers into. Back then it was manageable. During the day, even if Kaken wasn't nice to him anymore, the boy would at least talk to him, even if it was mostly about how he was a Deku and how he could never be a hero. At night, he would either work on his hero notebook with his mama or help with drying the dishes. She would hug him afterwards. She gave really good hugs. But mama was no longer there to comfort him. Kaken wasn't there to insult him. All he had was the cold and silent emptiness of his roost and the bright lights of the city when he flew over it. Izuku knew that he couldn't always just keep flying over the city when he got lonely. Not only was there a chance that someone could see him, he'd have to hunt more often since he'd be much more hungry afterwards. Visiting Eraserhead was reckless. He knew that. He did. But Eraserhead had talked to him. Thanked him. Izuku didn't realize that someone just acknowledging him would give him this sort of feeling. Even after he had escorted Eraserhead back to his apartment building, the owl had ridden the high off of that encounter for a while, doing his best to do barrel rolls in the sky during overcast nights. But soon enough, the loneliness set in again. He had continued watching Eraserhead during his patrols, the man in question frequently checking the skies when he wasn't taking down people breaking the law. Despite that, Izuku stayed hidden. He wasn't sure what to do after getting so up close with the pro hero. Did he trust Eraserhead? He supposed he did. That wasn't what the issue was though. Izuku had always loved heroes. Had always trusted heroes. Had always trusted that they would do the right thing. To save people. To help others. That was what a hero was to Izuku. Eraserhead was a good hero. Izuku knew that from watching him. He patrolled at night and fought crime. He comforted others after they were attacked. He did all of this without a visible quirk. Izuku was pretty sure he liked Eraserhead more than he liked All Might now. The issue was that Mama said that the heroes didn't want to help them. Izuku would like to think that Eraserhead would have helped them. But it was something he would never know now. It would be fine. Izuku reasoned with himself. Eraserhead had no idea who Midoriya Izuku was. And Midoriya Izuku was dead. He was just Izuku now. Izuku the owl. Mama had told him to hide after all. He would win this final game for his mama. As long as Eraserhead never found out who he really was, everything would be alright. Shoyuta had not seen those green eyes in over a week. It was slightly unnerving as much as he hated to admit it. Hisashi had insisted that the owl liked him. But seeing as he had not seen even a faint owl-shaped silhouette recently, he sincerely doubted the blonde's words. How was he supposed to earn the trust of a wild animal if said animal wasn't even around for him to try? If it was anything like the feral or stray cats he would sometimes see in the streets, he knew he was in for a future of sharp claws and nipping beaks. He'd take that over the knife carrying though. Hisashi, after he had gotten over his shock at the contents of the photo, had taken the photo and run away with it, saving it as his phone's lock screen and then creating memes. Shoyuta couldn't help but think that the raptor and Hisashi might actually get along as he imagined the owl perched on Hisashi's present Mike's wild cockatoo-like crest of a hairdo. He hid his amusement behind his capture weapon. If he ever had the chance, he knew he'd have to try to get that to happen. He made his way home on the empty streets, shadows long and distorted by the sporadic blinking of the street light. It was yet another patrol over with no owl sighting. Yoo-hoo! Shoyuta immediately looked up when he heard the echoing hoot eyes. Already scanning for the owl. It didn't take long before he located the bird who was watching him from a tree, the darker-toned autumn leaves helping it blend in almost seamlessly. However, those big green eyes were a big giveaway to its position, he mused. He hadn't realized that there was a chance he'd be seeing the bird of prey right by his home. Did the owl follow him back before? He had never noticed anything like that, but he supposed it was just an owl doing what an owl does. They were notorious for being silent flyers, and Shoyuta could say with confidence that he had never heard the owl without first being alerted beforehand. I'm Aizawa Shoyuta. The hero gave a shallow bow in the tree's direction. He really hoped no one was watching him right now. If he had to explain his actions to anyone, he was going to be annoyed. A chirp and a tilt of a feathery head was the reply given. This really could be an intelligence quirk. As you may know, I live in the building right here, Shoyuta continued. If you'd like, you could come visit sometime. This time, a clack of the beak. I'll go in and show you where our balcony is. The hero quickly finished and speed-walked towards the entrance and called over his shoulder, please don't fly away yet. Shoyuta started running as soon as he hit the stairs, completely ignoring the elevator. By the time he had reached his floor, he was locked in a dead sprint. Almost tripping as he stopped at their door, he hastily unlocked it, shoving it closed once he entered. A quick turn and the door was locked once again. Hisashi would never forgive him if he forgot to lock the door, even if it was to show an owl where they lived. He kicked his boots off, foregoing house slippers, and glided straight to the sliding glass doors that led to their small apartment balcony. Shoyuta stepped outside, the cool night wind blowing into their living room. Peering over the edge, he hoped that the owl was still there. Almost straight away, green eyes met his own. The owl had stayed. Shoyuta almost couldn't believe it. They stared at each other, no words or vocalizations passing between them. The hero took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you." 1 second passed. 2 seconds. 3. "Yoo-hoo," the owl finally replied. And with that, the bird dropped out of the tree, wings already spread out and gliding silently away. The dark-haired man watched as the owl got further and further away, the dark shape blending expertly into the shadows of the night. "Show you decide." How was he going to explain this to Hisashi? It had been a few nights after Izuku had met with Eraserno. He introduced himself as Aizawa. It had been a long time since he had learned someone's name. Owls didn't speak like humans, so he'd never have the chance to say the pro's name, but it was a principle for him. Ever since he hadn't been able to pronounce Kaken's name when he was younger, he would practice pronunciation on his own. He had his own Izuku. Mama was Ainkyo. And there was Hayasashir. And Katsuki. And now Aizawa. And while he couldn't say them out loud to make sure they were correct, he could still try with his imagination. Izuku was excited. It may not have seemed as much, but the opportunity to see Aizawa-san's home really was tempting. And he had an invitation too. That meant the hero wanted to see him more often, right? He was a bit worried though. Should he bring something with him? It was only proper, bringing a small gift on the first visit to someone's home. Izuku didn't think Aizawa-san would be pleased if he brought over a nice rat though, or even a pigeon. He wasn't even sure if humans ate those. He was pretty sure his mama had never let him have those back then at least. Izuku clicked his beak in annoyance. Was it really that hard to figure out a small gift for someone else? Could he give the pro hero an eraser? He had a few of those and plus, erasers for Eraserhead made a lot of sense. And they were very helpful if you needed to erase anything. Owls had no fingers or thumbs, so it's not as if he could write anymore. Yes, he decided. Erasers would be perfect for a gift. Plucking up a few of the small erasers, Izuku quickly winged his way to Aizawa-san's home. He wanted to make sure he dropped them off before he had to go hunt later that night. The sky was already turning dark, so the owl felt comfortable leaving his roost earlier than he usually did. The balcony was empty when he arrived. He glided down, dropping the erasers as he swerved and immediately retreated back into a nearby tree. Izuku wanted to wait until the sun fully set before he started hunting for his meal to lower the chances of him being seen. This area that Aizawa-san lived in had a fair amount of people living in it. While the hero was alright with him, he didn't know anything about anyone else who lived here. Minutes passed, the sky steadily getting darker and darker. Izuku could hear so many people. Their footsteps, their voices. This was the closest he had been to so many humans in a long time. He was glad that he was hidden in the tree. The owl made sure that his eyes were semi-lidded as well. It would be horrible if he had gotten seen because of his un-owl-like eye color. Deku. Izuku perked up. A pigeon. He tilted his head from side to side, triangulating the pigeon's location. The most acute sounds of claws clicking against concrete were heard by his ears. The slight sound of a beak preening feathers, and then the ruffle of the same feathers were as well. The owl swept his lidded gaze across his current vicinity, which was thankfully devoid of humans for now. He then directed his gaze up, directly honing onto Aizawa-san's balcony where he knew the pigeon was located. Izuku slowly made his way up the tree's branches, keeping close to the trunk while he was at it. He had never tried to catch anything starting from a lower position before, and with how the balconies were organized, he was afraid. He might accidentally crash into something. It was too bad that no tree here was tall enough to be eye level with the balcony. That would have been perfect. Pigeons on their lonesome were much easier to deal with. The amount of noise pigeons would make if he tried snagging one when they were grouped together was absurd. He had tried it only once and never again. Faced with such an easy meal, how was he supposed to resist? By the time Izuku had made it to the topmost branch of the tree, still stories below where the pigeon was nesting for the night, the sky was much darker, now in shades of dusky purple. He was glad. Night was the safest for someone like him. Izuku hopped off the branch, flapping his wings a few times to gain necessary height. As soon as he had that, he swerved, wings angling to allow him to reposition himself mid-flight if he needed to. Carefully making sure he wouldn't knock himself into the landing of the balcony above Aizawa-san's, Izuku dove, talons moving out. It took less than a second for him to strike into his meal. The owl chirped happily, nudging the erasers closer to the doors before digging the claws of one leg deeper into the now dead pigeon. With a cautious flap, Izuku leapt up, bracing himself on the ledge with his free leg. Not waiting to fully balance, he pushed off with the pigeon still clutched tightly in his grip. With only a slight wobble from the additional weight carried that he quickly was corrected, Izuku flew off, as if he was never there. It was rare that Aizawa Shoyuda had the entire day off. In this particular case, he had gotten his ankle sprained the previous night, the hospital ordering him to take it easy on that ankle for the next couple of days. Hizashi had immediately forced him into compliance with his wibbly lips. Shoyuda spent his suddenly freed up hours taking all the naps he could and reading a bit up on owls. Any extra knowledge could only help him at this point. Hizashi had already left for the studio hours ago and so far, nothing substantial had happened. He was relaxing in bed, eyes drooping when he heard a small thud. But after waiting a second with no change, he had ended up pulling his laptop from his desk to his lap. Opening the security camera program he had installed when he and Hizashi had moved in together, he quickly clicked into the past records of the security footage. He couldn't just ignore a sound like that, especially if it was on their balcony. What if it was a villain? They lived relatively high up, but there were definitely villains with quirks that allowed them to easily climb walls or leap great distances. Shoyuda was always careful not that nobody followed him home, and he impressed that onto Hizashi as well. In fact, the only time he'd actually let someone know where he lived was when he had shown the owl their balcony. He was hoping it was just the owl popping by for a visit. That was something he had been looking forward to. He carefully rewinded the footage back. A few minutes and pressed play. He watched. Had a sip of his decaffeinated tea. Thanks, Zashi. And sighed. At least it was just the owl. Shoyuda relaxed back into his pillow for a bit and then froze. It was the owl. He scrambled out of bed, taking the laptop and his tea with him to the living room. Placing both down on the coffee table, he hurriedly drew open the curtains to the balcony windows. Dark eyes inspected the landing, quickly drawn to the small objects laying there, a stark white against the concrete. Shoyuda squinted. Were these what the owl had dropped off before helping itself to that balcony pigeon that Hizashi complained about so much? At least there would be no more complaints about pigeon sheets now. He slid open the glass door just a smidge to pick one up. It was an eraser. Was this some sort of threat? Wouldn't it have been more effective if the dead pigeon had been left on the balcony as well? Shoyuda grumbled as he picked up the rest of the erasers, noting that they had been chewed on before, bits of it very crumbly and already falling onto the floor. If he was correct, and he was pretty sure he was, then where were the pencils the erasers came from? Did the owl know how to write? Why just bring the heads? The pencils. They were eraser heads, Shoyuda marveled to himself. The only other way to easily convey this would have been to literally drop them on his head. The pro was glad that was not the choice the owl had made in the end. With this, though, it was almost obvious that the owl had some sort of intelligence quirk. Knowing he was Eraserhead and being able to identify erasers and equate them with him, that was some next-level thought process. He sank back onto the couch after sliding the door closed, tugging his laptop closer. He quickly cut out the portion of footage with the owl, saving it, and then switched to a tab already open to the Hero Network. Shoyuda frowned to himself. Should he be using the Hero Network for this? He wasn't trying to earn the trust of the owl for some official hero mission. And while he was trying to ask for assistance, it was more of an advice sort of thing. Plus, he didn't really want other heroes to know about the owl. It would be a mess if others found out. Probably. He groaned, opening a new tab for his personal email. He wanted a private conversation, and by the gods, he was going to make sure he had one. Even if it meant using his personal email to contact his old teacher. The underground hero typed, the sound of the keys clacking filling the room. To nedzu@ua.ed.jp. From izawa.s@hmail.co.jp. Subject, Lowell living in Muzutafu, Quirk. Greetings, Principal Nedzu. Recently I have come in contact with an owl. After a few separate encounters, I have come to believe that it is possible that this owl could have some sort of intelligence-enhancing quirk. It is a wild animal choosing to live in an urban area. It once stole a knife from someone trying to stab me when I was on duty. Seems to understand what I say, including up to an invitation to my balcony. It brought me the eraser heads off pencils, showing that it understands my code name. I have been trying to befriend and gain the trust of this owl. If you have any sort of advice for my situation, I would be thankful. Attached is some supplementary material. Birds. Izawa Shoyuda. Attachments. owl_knife.jpg. Glancing through the email for typos, Shoyuda sent it off when he saw he had none. He hadn't wanted it to come to this, but he was just so out of his depth here. It was only logical that an animal with a quirk be asked about an animal with a quirk. Barely half an hour passed before his laptop pinged with an email notification. Netsu hadn't slowed down at all. He clicked into it, a small spike of anxiety leaping into his throat. Even after all these years, emails from the principal could still make him feel this way. This wasn't even school-related, he reasoned to himself. Shoyuda started reading. To izawa.s@hmail.co.jp. From nedzu@ua.ed.jp. Subject. Owl living in Mizudafu Quirk. Dear Izawa-kun, I am pleased you have decided to contact me in regards to the owl living in the area. I have already been keeping an eye on him, but more eyes are always welcome. With the addition of your video, I can confirm he is a juvenile of the Eurasian eagle owl species. Quite a rarity in these parts, I must say. The last official sightings in Japan were many years ago, before even the age of quirks. And only ever in Hokkaido. As for the matter of a quirk, I do believe there is a high possibility. Do continue to keep an eye on him, Izawa-kun. I would, myself, but I shall have to content myself from a distance. Owls are notoriously wary of humans, so the fact that you have already had multiple encounters initiated by him can only be a good sign. When you do gain his trust, I should like you to come visit Yue with him. Perhaps we can all share a nice cup of tea. A dog, a mouse, or a bear. I am the principal. Shoyuda frowned as he read the reply. He hadn't realized that Nedzu had already been keeping tabs on the owl. It wasn't that surprising though. The principal of UA primarily dealt in information. Knowledge was power, especially in the dangerous career of a pro hero. It was what made the world go around down in the deep, nastier parts of the world. There was a reason why informants were highly coveted resources. Speaking of information, Nedzu had given him some new scraps at least. Plus, if the smartest creature in the country agreed there was a quirk involved, that was good enough for him. He had settled into the couch, opening up articles on the species of owl that Nedzu had identified as his balcony visitor. A lot of them reiterated the same information, but there were some facts that made his mind boggle. He hadn't realized owls could get that big, and the sheer amount of force they could exert with their talons? Bone-chilling. Shoyuda was about to doze off when he heard an odd barking sound. He blinked in the direction of the balcony, only just a bit startled when he saw the owl perched there. With the light already turned on in the living room, he was finally able to appreciate the tawny buff coloring of the owl's feathers. Hey there. Shoyuda leaned over with a small smile on his lips, motioning over to the closed doors. Thanks for visiting. Do you mind if I open this a bit? A blink was his reply, and the pro hero slowly reached his hand to the door, breathing out in relief when the owl didn't move away or fly off. He slid the door open as quietly as he could, leaving enough room for the owl to come in if he wanted to. Shoyuda dragged one of the fold-up chairs that they kept around for visitors and unfolded it, sitting right by the doors. Thanks for the erasers, he blurted out, hand rubbing the back of his neck. You're a smart guy, aren't you? Shoyuda considered himself decent at reading body language, but all the head bobbing the owl tended to do really put his observation skills to the test. You know. The hero started, a chuckle escaping his lips as the owl tilted his head at him, shuffling just a bit closer. It's getting weird just calling you the owl in my head. The bird chirped at him, big eyes staring at the compression bandage wrapped around his ankle. Oh, this. Shoyuda grumbled, got hurt last night. Had a healing quirk used on it at the hospital already. I'll be fine. A peep. Are you judging me? Another tilt of the head. I can't believe an owl is judging me. Yoo-hoo. Yeah. Laugh it up. Shoyuta could feel himself relaxing even further as he made small talk with the owl before he realized that he was still calling him the owl. Hey, do you have a name? As soon as the words passed his lips, he could feel the sharp gaze of the owl on him, ratcheting up the tension in the room. Was that a taboo question? Did owls have names? Did they not? Was he trotting over some owl tradition? If you don't mind, I could give one to you. At that, the owl seemed to untense, blinking and responding with a chirp. Your species is known as the Washimimizuku in this country, Shoyuta begins. You're still growing, but it's pretty likely your wingspan will be longer than how I am tall. Can I call you Mimizuku? Izuku enjoyed flying immensely. Not only was it good exercise, it gave him a sense of freedom. If he really wanted to, he could probably go anywhere he wanted in the world. He didn't want to leave though. Things for him had been steadily going well, and he would hate for that to change. Izuku may not have his mama anymore, but now he had Aizawa-san. Did Kaken even miss him? He had all the food he could eat. He didn't even remember what katsudon tasted like anymore. He had a home. The memories of his old room were getting dimmer and dimmer every day. This was his life now. Every single night he spent as an owl seemed to make it more permanent. Normal kids, Kaken, would be going to school and learning all the things school kids had to know. Izuku slept through most of the day, only waking to preen and clean his toes with precise nibbles. Normal kids, Kaken, would be practicing with their quirks and maybe even start learning how to be a hero. For Izuku, his quirk was his life. Izuku thought about it long and hard. He would rather stay this way forever than to go back. This way, no one could call him names. No one could beat him up for protecting others. If he got lonely, he could visit Aizawa-san. He really liked spending time with Aizawa-san. The pro hero always seemed grumpy with a neutral expression on his face, but Izuku always enjoyed their semi-one-sided conversations. Aizawa-san had even given him a name, Mimizuku. Izuku had thought it strange that it sounded so similar to his actual name, but he liked it a lot. It did make responding to his new name easy to get used to. When he would visit, Aizawa-san would always pull up a chair to the balcony and just spend time with him. Occasionally, he would read Eagle Owl facts to him. There were even a few times where they both just listened to the radio. However, most of their time together was spent in silence, just the two of them occupying the same space. The pro would even fall asleep sometimes if he had just gotten back from his patrol. Izuku would try to wake him up before he left. He didn't want the hero to catch a cold. It wasn't often that he visited 2 nights in a row, but Aizawa-san had said he wanted to introduce someone to him. Izuku was wary and a bit curious about who this someone was. Aizawa-san wouldn't try to have him meet someone mean, right? The pro hero usually worked alone when he was out, the owl knew. So who could it be? Izuku hoped they were nice. Shoyuta was looking forward to tonight. It had been over a month since Mimizuku's first visit, and since then, the owl had visited every few days. After the 3rd time, Shoyuta had taken a little step stool they had and covered it with a towel for the owl to stand on. He had noticed that Mimizuku hopped off his perch and onto the landing pretty frequently during his visits. This way, at least his talons wouldn't get blunted. The first time that Shoyuta had left it out on the balcony for him, the owl had promptly landed on it, his feathers all loose and ruffled in relaxation. The pro wondered if the owl knew if it was for him. Nowadays, Shoyuta could leave the glass door open with the stool parked right by the entrance and Mimizuku would still land on it. On this particular visit, he was planning to introduce Hizashi to Mimizuku. His husband had laughed in his face when he had told him that he gave the name Mimizuku to the owl. It was a good descriptive name, it could have been worse. Plus, Mimizuku seemed to approve of it, responding to the calls of his name with coos and clicks of his beak. It had taken a few days, but Hizashi had finally managed to get the night off for this. He had been excited to learn that he was going to meet the knife owl in person. Shoyuta just hoped that Hizashi listened to him and didn't get too close. He knew from previous visits that Mimizuku liked his space, clacking his beak and moving a few steps away if he ever got within arm's length. He also knew that the owl disliked loud noises. Frankly speaking, Hizashi seemed to be made of traits that Mimizuku didn't enjoy. He really did hope they got along though. A small thud brought him out of his thoughts, a small gust of wind ruffling his hair. He looked up to see the owl ruffling the feathers on his wings, rearranging them to lie down flat. "Thanks for coming." A chirp. Shoyuta smiled. "Have you started to hunt yet tonight?" 1 tap. 2 taps. "Thanks for coming tonight. The person I want you to meet is coming soon." A tilt of the head. "He's a pretty excitable person, but he doesn't mean you any harm." A quieter peep. And as if his husband had timed it, he bursted in through the door, hair still up in its dew. "Yeah, I'm home." Mimizuku immediately puffed up at the sudden yell, ear tufts perking up with his broad wings flaring out behind him. He clicked his beak and swayed, appearing almost double his actual size. Hizashi was frozen at the sight, his eyes wide in suppressed panic and gazing over at the other pro. Hey. Shoyuta did his best to hide his terseness, keeping both his tone and body language relaxed. Hizashi didn't mean to be loud. "I warned him that you didn't like loud noises. He's sorry, right?" A crimson glare was edged at the still frozen radio host. "Why, I'm really sorry. I was just really excited to meet you." A few seconds passed, Shoyuta deactivating erasure before he looked back to see the owl's reaction. Mimizuku was squinting, looking like he was judging them, and then he deflated back down, feathers already laid back again. Yamada Hizashi, the blonde, bowed in greeting right afterwards, still standing by the entrance. "I'm Shuta's husband and the pro hero present, Mike. It's really nice to finally meet you." To Shuta's surprise, the owl bowed in reply. His mind raced with questions. Did an intelligence quirk enable understanding of human customs as well? To his knowledge, Mimizuka didn't really spend much of his time around people, with the lone exception of himself. Where else would he have picked something up like that? Or was he just mimicking what Hizashi did? Mimizuka bobbed his head a few times, looking not at the blonde man, but at his hair. He hopped onto the nearest arm of the couch, none of the talons piercing into the furniture, only to continue to peer over at Hizashi's hair. "You curious about this?" The blonde made an elaborate gesture at his slicked-up hair with a pleased look, continuing on when Mimizuka tapped a talon against the couch arm. "It's for uniform, you know. For when I have hero patrols and stuff." The owl cooed and hopped back onto his stool, wings spreaded open slightly for balance. "Oh, that's gotta be a pretty wild wingspan." Hizashi towed his way to the living room. "Finally, you've told me a lot about him, but it's really cool to see him, like in front of me." "He's still growing too," Shoyuta smirked when Mimizuka fully extended his wings as if on cue, a chirp escaping his beak. "Eagle owls like Mimizuku are one of the biggest owls in the world." "You're so proud of him," Hizashi grinned unabashedly. "It's like you're a happy bird dad." "What? Does that mean I'm a dad too?" "Hizashi." Izuku liked Yamada-san. He had been scared of him at first. The man was all loose gestures, loud voice, and tall crested hair, but he was really nice actually. Yamada-san talked a lot more than Aizawa-san, and Izuku enjoyed hearing him talk about his day. From things like how the radio agency was run, to things like how he had to cross the street when he saw this huge bug on the tree by the convenience store, Izuku listened to it all. Yamada-san would even tell him about his hero patrols and which heroes he would do team-ups with. He had even shown him how he was dressed in his hero uniform. Izuku still thought the hair was a bit silly though. It always startled him for a second, before he realized it was just Yamada-san. The first few times, Aizawa-san always made sure to also be there when Yamada-san was, but he couldn't always stick around. Eraserhead still had a job to do after all. Izuku was glad that Aizawa-san had clarified for him to tap out replies for yes and no questions. It was a simple 1 tap for yes and 2 for no, but it helped a lot if he wanted to make his opinion known. Izuku found himself visiting their apartment more and more. Ever since Yamada-san had made that comment about being a happy bird dad, the owl had been pondering over that statement more and more. Was it possible that he was thinking too deep into it? Very likely, yeah, but it made him feel all kinds of warm and fuzzy inside. Maybe it was just a joke, but Izuku did think Aizawa-san and Yamada-san would be nice parents. Truth be told, Izuku had grown immensely fond of the both of them, and he knew they both liked him back. But all they knew was that he was a smart bird. They thought he was a bird with a quirk. He was lying to them. But it's not as if he could tell them the truth. Could he tell them? Would Aizawa-san and Yamada-san even want to help him if they really knew who he was? Izuku hated this. He wanted to trust them. But Mama had told him to hide. How was he supposed to decide what to do? Izuku loved his mama. He had been so lonely when he was hiding though. But if he didn't listen to his mama's last words, then what kind of son was he? A few low voices brought him out of his silent pondering. Izuku closed his eyes immediately, making sure he was as invisible as he could make it on such short notice. It only took a few minutes before the people cleared out, leaving the owl alone once again. Izuku wondered what they were talking about. Made no sense to him why people would try to sell other people things near a dumpster in an alleyway. Especially if it was bad things like drags. Izuku worried. He knew drags were bad. All Might Say No to Drags campaign had been played a few times on the TV at daycare and he had always paid attention to it. He had wanted to be a hero, and heroes didn't do things to their body that would make it harder for them to be heroes. People selling drags in alleyways couldn't be good. Was this something he could let Aizawa-san know about? Izuku flew off, intent on finding a different dumpster to hunt from tonight. He could figure out how to tell the pro hero later. It wouldn't be right to know about this and let it happen. Trigger. Shoyuta frowned as he scanned through the recent reports CC'd to him by the detective he was currently working with for this case. Trigger again. It wasn't exactly rare for these types of cases to pop up on a one-to-one basis, but so many? And all around the same time? It was definitely suspicious. And dangerous. Hizashi had already almost gotten blown through a building today due to some villain with a wind quirk being hopped on Trigger. The blonde was usually pretty good about staying out of harm's way with his emphasis on long-distance attacks, but Trigger tended to introduce an unpredictable element to the fight. The worst thing was that it seemed to be one of those American brands that were being distributed. Hours of quirk enhancement? It was hell to go against. Especially if the villains planned well. Finding the distribution site would be the highest priority. If they could track it down, they could nip the rest of this in the bud. Obviously some had already been sold, but it was only logical that the dealers were still around. Previous cases noted that a few of villains that were arrested in Trigger cases were all broken out, never to be seen again. Shoyuta would bet anything that the dealers were involved. He rubbed at his eyes, blinking one open when he heard the now familiar thud of Mimizuku landing onto the stool. A smile tugged at his lips. It was always nice to see the owl. It's nice to see you again. Mimizuku tapped out a "S" before hopping onto the couch arm, peering at the screen of his laptop. It's work, Shoyuta sighed, swallowing a yawn, and it's classified, probably. He didn't exactly know if telling an animal with an intelligence quirk this sort of thing was illegal, but he didn't want to risk it. There was a reason why he never told law enforcement about the knife incident. The internet was not helpful when he tried to find a clear answer about having to arrest owls for vigilantism. He had given Mimizuku a small lecture later on though, and the owl had seemed contrite at the time if nothing else. Mimizuku gave a peep at his reply, hopping onto the back of the couch this time with his eyes still on the laptop, talons not even breaking through the fabric. Shoyuta held himself very still at the owl's closeness. This was the first time he'd been so close to the owl. Mimizuku usually would have moved himself away by now. He held up a finger close to the owl's head, groaning just a bit in his mind when it was ignored. Mimizuku then jumped onto the coffee table, balancing effortlessly with only a small flare of his wings and tail. He tapped 4 times. Hizashi! Shoyuta could feel his mood drop at the reminder. He got hurt during his patrol. You were looking forward to seeing him today, huh? The owl seemed to deflate at the knowledge, tapping out a yes. He was lucky he didn't get hurt worse. Don't worry about him, all right? He just has to stay overnight at the hospital. Mimizuku cooed, jumping back onto the couch next to him. To Shuta's surprise, the owl then clambered onto his forearm, his weight a comfortable pressure and talons barely prickling through his sleeve. What are you doing? The pro would forever deny the fondness that dripped into his voice whenever he talked to the owl. The next words that were going to be said were forgotten as Mimizuku reached up and nuzzled his cheek. The glossy feathers were cool to the touch and soft as well, Shoyuta marveled. He smiled. Was the owl trying to comfort him? Thank you, Mimizuku. It had been a long time since Izuku had been comfortable with touch. He could remember his mama's hugs and how he could sink into them. Could remember the stickiness of Kaken's hands when they crossed the streets together back when they were still the best of friends. Could remember the bursts of heat popping against him. Getting pushed back. Getting knocked into the ground. All because he hadn't manifested a quirk. The memories of his mama only grew dimmer and dimmer as each night passed. Being an owl now also didn't exactly give him any chances to get close to others, not that he wanted to either. Not until Aizawa-san at least. And even with Aizawa-san, he was careful to keep his distance. Maybe it was silly of him, but he just didn't want to get hurt again. Kaken wanted to become a hero and Kaken had hurt him. Was it too far to assume that another hero would do the same thing? Izuku wasn't even sure what Aizawa-san's quirk was. It had caused him to be wary at first, making sure that he always had an escape route ready if something happened that he didn't like. But night after night passed, and nothing happened. When Izuku had started visiting Aizawa-san's balcony, and still nothing happened, the seed of trust had been planted. And that was where Izuku found himself now. When he had heard Yamada-san had gotten hurt, worry had flooded him. He knew Aizawa-san felt worse than he did though. They were married to each other after all. Hisashi had been married to Mama too, but the two married couples were nothing alike. Izuku didn't exactly have arms to hug Aizawa-san with, but he just couldn't bear to not try to give some measure of comfort to the man. It was what his mama would have done for him, so it was only right to try his best for the man who had become so important to him. From the very first touch, Izuku realized a few things. He was warm. He liked this. And he had missed this so much. Izuku let out a trill, eyes slipping close as he nuzzled Aizawa-san's face again. The man let out a chuckle, leaning his head down just a bit closer, giving more access to the owl, who now didn't have to extend upwards to get to his target. Eyes still closed, he jolted upwards when he felt a light slide down his back. As the strokes lengthened, going from the top of his head to the tip of his tail, he could feel himself relaxing into it. This was nice. Really nice. Thank you for trusting me, Aizawa-san murmured lowly. I know how hard it can be to trust someone. Izuku carefully tapped out yes, very aware that he was still standing on the pro-hero's forearm. He didn't want to accidentally harm Aizawa-san. Izuku knew full well how sharp his talons were. Huh, the man huffed. A reply like that makes me wonder what kind of life you led before all of this. Izuku peeped as he gingerly jumped back down onto the couch. To be honest, the owl didn't really think he was all that interesting before everything had happened. It wasn't as if he was telling Aizawa-san about his life though. That was something Izuku hoped that Aizawa-san would never find out. This was enough. What they had between the two of them was enough for Izuku. He didn't know what he'd do if Aizawa-san ever found out about the real him. Alright, keep your secrets. The pro-hero had a look of amusement on his face. I've got to finish going through these reports though, so you keep yourself amused, alright? Izuku fluffed up instead of replying, content to stay near the man. This was how they spent most of their time together anyways, in peace and silence. And in the meantime, Izuku could try to figure out how to let Aizawa-san know about the drag selling. While Izuku loved his quirk, he couldn't help but to think that being a talking owl would have been so much more helpful in this specific situation. Or maybe even a telepathic owl, that would have been cool as well. Anything that let him communicate easily would have been wonderful. Villains on Trigger are a pain in the butt to take down. Aizawa-san mumbled, interrupting Izuku's thoughts. Trigger? Izuku remembered hearing that word. Was that the name of the drag that the guy was trying to sell? He was sure of it. The owl clicked his beak, reaching up to tug at the man's sleeve until he got his attention. Is something wrong? Yes. Is this about Hisashi again? No. Is this about what I just said? Yes. Villains on Trigger? Yes. Aizawa-san gave him a funny look, a small crease appearing between his brows. Why do you know anything about Trigger? Izuku chirped at him before jumping over to the coffee table where Aizawa-san's laptop was. He could see the pro's aborted movement towards him, but the owl ignored that, continuing to look at the keyboard. He didn't really know how to type what he saw. He had only just gotten to writing down the types of weather and the seasons back in daycare, but he did remember the time and date that the seller had given the buyers. Izuku reached out with a talon and carefully poked at one of the number keys, before looking over at the pro. He tapped it once again. He really hoped that Aizawa-san understood what he was trying to say. Today was a day of many firsts. Not only had Mimizuku gotten close enough to initiate contact, but he had even allowed Shoyuta to do it as well. His heart had felt like it could explode. But not only that, the owl seemed to want to use his laptop. And apparently knew about Trigger? He leaned forward, opening the notepad application and gestured to the waiting owl, who chirped at him before slowly typing out a series of numbers. Mimizuku stretched out a foot after looking at the screen, clicking down on the backspace, and continued typing. Shoyuta was bewildered. Sure, Nedzu could use a computer, but he didn't expect Mimizuku to have that capacity as well. Nedzu's high specs was a rarity in itself. Just how smart was this owl? The typing continued for about a minute before the owl stopped and peeped at him. The pro blinked while looking at what was typed. Looks like a date and time, he murmured. What does that have to do with Trigger? Mimizuku only tapped out, yes, as a reply, tapping it out again when Shoyuta didn't reply. Don't tell me owls can get hopped on Trigger, Shoyuta grunted. What the F dash dot? The owl hopped towards him, flaring his wings slightly and clacked his beak. Oh, okay. Shoyuta was sufficiently cowed by the display, offering his finger to the owl. Sorry for insinuating that you took drags. Mimizuku, to his surprise, did not nip him and only just nudged his finger with the side of his head, then nibbled it, leaving no mark behind. Glad you know drags are bad at least. That this was his reply. This is a date and time then? Yes. And it has to do with Trigger? You're sure? Yes. All right then, Shoyuta sighs. This is as likely a lead as anything else we're going to get. Mimizuku ruffled his feathers, another peep escaping his beak. You know where you heard this, right? Yes. Can you take me there now? Yes. Will you be hanging around for this? No. Shoyuta raised an eyebrow, but he supposed that made sense. Mimizuku had given him a time and a date. The pro didn't even know if owls had a sense of time comparable to a human's. He even doubted that the bird even knew the current date or, God forbid, the time. Shoyuta was relatively sure that no owls owned calendars, clocks, or smartphones. Time was wholly a human construct after all. Stop by in 2 nights and I'll let you know how it works out. Mimizuku bobbed his head while also tapping a yes out. Cheeky brat, Shoyuta snorts, fondness lacing his voice. Come on, you have to show me where this happened. Meet me by the tree. Yes. Shoyuta had contacted Detective Tsukachi with the new lead as soon as he was alone, Mimizuku already a speckle in the sky. The man had been curious about where the new lead had come from, and that gave Shoyuta a pause. He couldn't exactly tell him that it was an owl with an intelligence quirk who may have overheard a Trigger deal going down. He was still actively working on gaining Mimizuku's trust, and something in him gnawed ferociously at telling Tsukachi the whole truth. A new informant, Shoyuta hummed. It was close enough and wasn't exactly wrong, just in case he ever had to say this where the good detective was able to use his quirk. Ah, well, I know how you underground types are about your informants, Tsukachi replied easily. I'll have someone on standby if you need backup tomorrow night. Shoyuta thanked him before hanging up, always paid to be on the good side of law enforcement after all. He carefully scoped out the alleyway, carefully mapping out the location in his head. The pro had to give it to Mimizuku. This alleyway really was out of the way for others. You'd have to know about it beforehand to get to it without some measure of confusion. He left the area with nothing moved, intent on starting on his own patrol. And before he knew it, the next day had arrived. Shoyuta had escorted Hizashi back from the hospital in the late afternoon, relief loosening up his chest when he saw the blonde give him a cheesy grin and finger guns in the waiting room. As they walked back to their apartment, the dark-haired man took the chance to tell the radio host about the previous night. And then he let me slide his back. What? No way. Heh, a smirk played on his lips. Yes way. It's not fair how our bird son loves you more than me. Shoyuta had to hide his widening smirk into his capture weapon. Guess you'll just have to be the second best dad, huh? Sho! Hizashi's grin was blinding and his tone teasing. You're admitting you're a dad. I'm so proud of you. Oh, shut it, you cockatoo. And just like that, the blonde squawked, like the nickname suggested he would. Hisashi really could be predictable at times. By the time they got back, the sky was starting to purple. As Hisashi relaxed onto the couch, he peered up at Shoyuta, who was reheating up some of the leftover miso soup he had made last night. There was something you left out earlier, yeah? Shoyuta muttered as he reached into the fridge for a slice of cheese, a loaf of bread already in one hand. Mimizuka might have given me the date and time of a drag bust. What the F dash? Yeah. While the skillet was starting to heat up, the dark-eyed man started to cut into the loaf, producing impeccable slices of bread ready for grilling. Learning how to properly handle a knife was probably one of the things from his job that he got the most use of in everyday life. He used my laptop to type it out. We knew he was smart, but I didn't realize that computers. Hisashi tapped a finger against his chin. Is the information valid? How did he even get it? It's tonight, so I guess we'll find out soon. And I'm guessing he overheard it while he was out doing whatever he does at night. This is like. Mimizuka is really smart. The blonde mussed his hair, fingers tangling into it, voice getting more and more incredulous as he continued. He understood your hero name. He recognized the name of a drag when hearing it again and could give you the date and name he heard probably at least an hour before coming over here. And he knows how to type. Shoyuta half-heartedly shrugged. Are we sure it's just an intelligence quirk? Hisashi looked completely serious as he spoke, and not like some owl transformation quirk. Hisashi. I've seen Mimizuka hunt rats before. We've both seen what happened to your balcony pigeon. Plus, he's been in this area for over half a year now. And remember, Nedzu said he's a juvenile. I doubt any good human parent would let their kid run wild like that at night eating rats from a dumpster. You haven't ever caught him in your erasure yet though. Nedzu's high spec is a mutation quirk, Shoyuta grumbled. He made me attend his private lessons that one time I used my quirk on him. I'm not risking the trust Mimizuku has in me just to check if I can erase his quirk. You've got a point there, Hisashi admitted. Well, we can deal with whatever his quirk is later. Nedzu's sure to be a help when we can take him to UA. Mimizuku's going to stop by tomorrow night if you can make it. The dark-haired pro slid over a freshly made grilled cheese sandwich along with a bowl of soup over to his husband. He was worried about you when I told him you got hurt. The cutie, Hisashi cooed as he took a big bite of the sandwich, yelping as the hot cheese dripped onto his finger. Such a good bird, son. Shoyuta snorted at that, ending the conversation in favor of having a light snack before leaving to stake out the alleyway. It wouldn't do to have his position betrayed because of a hungry stomach. The dark-haired man left soon afterwards, now donning the identity of the underground hero Eraserhead. It was now, in the slowly darkening city, that he felt most at home. He hoped Mimizuku's tip would end up being fruitful. While Trigger on the streets was never good, having long strings of cases was even worse. People get hurt. People end up going missing. And the suppliers get to skip town with no one the wiser. That wasn't even mentioning how its lingering presence on the streets gave it a chance to get trafficked into another prefecture. All in all, it culminated into many injured pros and so much FING paperwork. The alleyway was dark and empty when he finally reached it. He leaped, using his capture weapon to loop onto the railing of a balcony, making his way onto one of the lower roofs. The advantages of being close by far outweighed the dangers it could pose. Short-length ambush tactics were what he specialized in after all. It was only logical for him to be at a short distance as well. Shoyuta waited. Patience was a virtue, particularly in the world of underground heroics. Soon, the sun fell completely, washing the city in darkness. It was a quiet neighborhood that Shoyuta was currently in. Not the cleanest, but he had seen and smelled worse. He tamped down the background lighting on his phone before checking the time. Ding. Shoyuta narrowed his eyes at the sudden peal of a bicycle bell. Dropping his phone into his back pocket, he leaned forward just enough to see a man in a cap with a trash bag. A civilian? The pro kept quiet as the man pried open the dumpster lid, dropping his trash in. More movement. Shoyuta could feel his muscles tense in anticipation when another capped man arrived at the dumpster. This one had a briefcase tucked under one arm as well as a small bag of trash in the other. He swung his trash into the dumpster, a sneer on his face. Just in time. Quickly, please. Yeah, here it is. Don't lose it. Or else. Shoyuta could recognize Trigger like the back of his own hand. With that, he quickly slid his goggles on and jumped down. A split second passed as the wide eyes of the briefcase man met his own before he activated Erasure, quickly ending whatever quirk may have been used. The first man yelped at his sudden appearance, his fists turning a violent glowing red. Shoyuta quickly glared at him as well before snapping a leg out to catch an ankle and sweeping it to the side. As the man crashed into the wall, briefcase sliding from his grasp onto the concrete, Shoyuta immediately kicked it further away so that it was out of reach. Ducking down, the pro neatly dodged the upcoming punch to his head, blinking and reactivating Erasure on the man left standing. The man cursed, staring at his hands, before slipping out a thin knife from his pants. Shoyuta merely shot his capture weapon over, the tendrils looping around the wrists and pulled tightly. One roundhouse kick to the face sent the remaining man sprawling, knife slipping and spinning away. Shoyuta hummed, quickly tying up the first man who was still groaning from the hard hit to the head. The other had hit the wall hard enough to knock himself out, which worked out well for him. He propped open the briefcase, peeking in to make sure that the vials weren't compromised. It would have SEKD if they had broken in the small scuffle, not to mention that Tsukachi would have made him eat his own paperwork if he had ruined important evidence. He's eaten paper before and he really would like to avoid having to do it again in the near future. It seemed that Mimizuku's tip did end up panning out. He would have an interesting story to tell the owl tomorrow. For now, he had to get these drag traffickers processed before continuing his patrol. The night was still young and Shoyuta knew that this was just the start of a long night. Curiosity really was hard to resist, Izuku knew. It was even harder to resist once he had started living his life as an owl. With the ability to just fly anywhere he wanted, he had so many new opportunities open to him. Even so, Izuku very rarely left his own territory. Perhaps it was just an owl instinct given to him by his quirk, but he hated feeling like he would be leaving his territory unprotected if he left. After he had passed on the time and date he overheard, it took everything he had to not return to that dumpster the following night. Sure, he didn't know what the current date was, but Aizawa-san had asked him to come visit in 2 nights, which would mean that that night in between was the date drags might have been being sold. And that date was in March. Izuku had tried to keep track of the passing months at first, but grabbing trashed newspapers only served to make him feel inadequate. There was almost nothing he could read in it. Izuku didn't really know what to think about the knowledge of the current month except that it was a lot of months from his birthday in July. Just how long had he been like this? Just how long has Mama been gone? He shook his head, feathers getting ruffled in the process. It didn't matter now. He had something to look forward to later and Yamada-san should be back from the hospital as well. Izuku was practically bouncing by the time night fell, making his way to Aizawa-san's balcony. He hoped that the information he passed on had helped. He really didn't want to be wasting a hero's time. Especially if it was Eraserhead's time. Eraserhead now solidly placed number 1 in his list of best and coolest heroes. All Might was still really high up there, right next to Present Mike. Izuku wasn't able to watch any of Present Mike's patrols, but Yamada-san always told him about them. About the heroes he worked with, the people he saved, and the quirks that he saw in action. He was really good at telling stories, he even did sound effects for them. It kind of reminded him of how his mama used to read bedtime stories to him. Except the stories she told came out of books and were about saying goodnight to the moon. Izuku said hello to the moon now if he could see it. He landed onto his stool, talons sinking into the towel. Izuku was glad that Aizawa-san had thought of a way for him to not put holes into the furniture. It's not as if he had any money to buy a new stool. Plus, he didn't think a store would allow an owl to buy furniture anyways. Aizawa-san was already sitting on the couch as if he was waiting for him. There was a small black strap with buttons that he was fiddling with, but Izuku ignored it in favor of chirping a greeting. Mimizuku, the man gave him a tired smile. Good to see you. Izuku thought it was pretty good to see him as well, though he did think the pro looked even more exhausted than last he saw him. Did something happen? He tilted his head, doing his best to convey his worry, but he was pretty sure it didn't work because Aizawa-san only looked like he wanted to take a nap even more. Then Izuku heard footsteps and a familiar voice coming from the hallway. He perked up at the sight of the long hair and peeped when he saw the funny little mustache that Yamada-san had. Mimizuku. Izuku puffed out his chest hearing his name. Hey there, big bird. Heard you were worried about yours truly? Izuku tapped out, yes, before stretching his body upwards to properly see the man. Yamada-san was really tall, especially compared to him. He was actually pretty sure that Yamada-san was even taller than Aizawa-san. It was hard to see how tall Aizawa-san was though since he slouched so often and he spent most of his visits sitting down instead of standing. Izuku couldn't complain. A sitting Aizawa-san was much easier to relax with than a standing Aizawa-san. I'm pretty much all better now. Yamada-san bent down slightly, fingers tapping the bandage around his head. Thanks for worrying, buddy. The owl hopped off the stool, gliding past the dark-haired pro to land on the back of the couch right by the blonde. Izuku had been really worried, alright? He wanted to be completely sure that Yamada-san was really alright. Chirping at the blonde man, who chirped back at him. Aizawa-san was right in saying that Yamada-san was like a bird. He leaned in, flicking strands of long hair away with his beak. Show. I think he's fussing over me. Izuku ignored the two of them, the words merely background noise to him. He had a mission here. He wanted to make sure Yamada-san was all better. Heroes had to take care of their health, after all. Plus, Mama had always allowed him to put on bandages on her fingers if she had accidentally cut herself with the kitchen knife. Izuku knew how to keep wounds clean and to stop them from getting worse. He nudged the bandages, making sure that they weren't wet. Careful not to touch them with his beak, it was very sharp. He nuzzled his cheek against them instead. Is this a bird kiss? Yamada-san loudly whispered, which Izuku was very thankful for. He knew that Yamada-san's quirk could make him very loud and didn't want to be anywhere near if that happened. I got a bird kiss from our bird's son. Izuku was satisfied after a thorough look at the bandages, shuffling towards Aizawa-san, who was watching them both. He chirped, tilting his head at the dark-haired man. The man looked even worse close up, and that was saying something considering Izuku knew his eyesight to be pretty great. Cooing in worry, he hopped closer and nudged his head against Aizawa-san's chin. Trying to comfort people with no hands was surprisingly hard, Izuku decided. At least now Aizawa-san seemed to have a small smile on his face. If Aizawa-san could smile again, Izuku would consider this a job well done. It only lasted for a few seconds before Yamada-san came to sit on the couch as well, giving the other man a poke. Don't you have something you wanted to tell our son? Oh, right. Aizawa-san blinked, covering it. Yawn with his hand. Mimisu, that information you gave me, it was good. We actually arrested a supplier and a dealer, both involved with Trigger. Izuku chirped with happiness, glad that he was able to help. About that, the man continued, I told Tsukachi, the detective I'm working with on this, that you were an informant and he asked me if you had any other information to pass on this. Izuku thought to himself for a minute before tapping a no. He was sure that if he did hear anything else about this, he would have remembered. But now that he knew that this information was helpful, he would make sure to pay more attention to conversations by dumpsters when he was out at night. If he could help out in such a way, he wanted to at least try. It would be saving people like Yamada-san from getting hurt when villains used the drags. I'm telling you right now, I don't like it, Aizawa-san frowned, eyebrows scrunched together, but the information you gave me really did help us a lot. If you do hear anything else like this, please let me know. Izuku quickly tapped yes, knowing that even if Aizawa-san didn't ask him, he would have done it anyways. You're eager, aren't you? Izuku decided to not reply to that question, turning his head to the side instead. Yamada-san giggled as he watched them. Mimizuku is too cute, Sho. He's acting like a petulant kid. Hizashi. Aizawa-san grumbled, elbowing the blonde man before picking up Black's strap on the table. Anyways, I got something for you. Izuku wondered what it was, jumping down to the couch seat to examine it more closely. It's an audio recorder and a tracker. He tapped the two buttons visible. Press this button to start recording and press it again to stop. The tracker works the same way, just with the other button. Izuku was a bit confused. He could see why something like a recorder would be helpful. It could be used to record conversions he overheard, and since he couldn't exactly speak, this would make it so he didn't have to use the laptop to type. But the tracker? He really wasn't sure. The recorder is for us, so it's easier to relay information and we'll get it word for word. Aizawa-san paused, the tired smile returning. The tracker is for me, so if you ever get hurt or if you need me, I can find you. This is a dangerous job, Mimizuku. I don't want you getting hurt. Izuku could feel his heart swell. Aizawa-san really was nice. Can I put this on you? Yes. Can you get onto the table and give me your foot? Izuku hopped onto the coffee table instead of replying, easily balancing on one leg and offering the other to the pro. Aizawa-san was careful when strapping it to him, going slow and making sure it was comfortable for him and wouldn't get in the way of his hunting. There we go, he leaned back afterwards. Feel all right? Yes. How about you give it a test run? To make sure you can reach the buttons. Izuku tapped a button with one of his talons carefully. It would be bad to break Aizawa-san's gear. Jumping a bit when he heard it make a small whirring noise, he looked over at the pros before tapping it again, the noise dying down almost immediately. Aizawa-san pulled out his laptop, checking something quickly. Looks like it works fine. Izuku blinked at him, looking down at his leg. Didn't he need to give the recorder back for Aizawa-san to find out what was recorded? This specific recorder uses Bluetooth to transmit the information to my laptop once you're in range. If you don't record anything, nothing gets transmitted. It was pretty cool, Izuku decided. It was like his own hero gear. Mimisu, just promise me you'll be careful when you do this, Aizawa-san continued, looking very serious as he spoke. It was rare that he wasn't serious, but after so long, Izuku felt he could understand when the man was his usual serious compared to being Eraserhead serious. Yes. Izuku chirped as well, making his way to a couch cushion to nudge at one of Aizawa-san's hands, which then stroked the top of his head. He wasn't sure why he did it. Perhaps it was a reassurance to the man that he would be careful, a promise he knew he would try to keep. For himself. For his mama. And now for Aizawa-san. Shoyuta could feel Hisashi's gleeful eyes on them, could see those fingers reaching for his phone. He rolled his eyes but didn't stop him. Hisashi had always been fond of taking photos, insisting it was one of the best ways to record memories. He actually had a stash of photo albums packed in their spare room that he occasionally took out to look through. Shoyuta already knew that this photo was going to end up there, along with that photo of Mimizuku with the knife. You two are so adorable. Grinning as he snapped a photo, the blonde shot his bright eyes over to his own. Sho, do you think he'll let me try? Shouldn't you just ask him? He returned with a raised eyebrow. Mimizuku is perfectly capable of deciding that on his own. Yeah, but he likes you more. Hisashi whined, gaze changing targets. How about it, buddy? Can I pet you too? Mimizuku blinked his eyes back open, their vivid green color visible once again. The one obvious oddity about this owl at first glance. It had been months since he had met this strange owl, he realized. Months that he spent building up a relationship with Mimizuku. Months that Hisashi insisted that he spent slowly metamorphosing into a dad. Shoyuta found that he didn't really mind it. He had followed the jokes for Hisashi's sake, but he didn't think what he did was equivalent to what a father would be doing. It was just now that he was finally starting to understand what the blonde had meant. But only a bit. It wasn't as if he was responsible for Mimizuku, not in the way that mattered. Mimizuku was his own individual that just had a fondness for their small family. Shoyuta was mature enough to admit that the same fondness was replicated. However, it was more complicated than before now. Tsukachi had contacted him after interrogating the men he had brought in with Mimizuku's information. He had told him that not only was one a dealer, one was a supplier. A big fish. That information that Mimizuku had overheard and passed on to him could potentially topple a pillar of drag trafficking in there and other surrounding areas. This was leading up to be a bigger case than he and Tsukachi had anticipated. The detective had ended up asking again about who he had gotten the lead from, and though Shoyuta had rebuffed every effort for more information, the man had asked if his informant had any other information on this case. His gut had sunk when Tsukachi had given him actual good reasoning behind his asking. Information like this, the police would pay good money for. This case was only getting bigger from here. Drags were already a major issue, with trigger cases only getting more common in the last few weeks. And Mimizuku had stumbled into this mess. An owl. A kid owl. Netsu's comment had unfazed him when he had first read it, but now with this situation, it was coming back to bite his butt. Did it matter how smart the owl was when he still had those soft downy feathers on his head and trailing down his back? He was the equivalent of a young teenager. He didn't like this at all. Shoyuta knew he was compromised when it came down to making a decision for Mimizuku's future involvement in this case. He had ended up requisitioning a recorder for the owl, the tracker added to it for his own peace of mind. Shoyuta wished he could say he was surprised when Mimizuku agreed to trying to find more information. He kind of wished that the owl didn't. Owls shouldn't be doing the jobs of police informants. They should be out there, doing what owls did with their time. Mimizuku was only an owl. He was almost frail compared to a human and definitely smaller. He had the advantage of flight, true, but one well-aimed gunshot could easily snipe him from the sky. Shoyuta would never be able to forgive himself if Mimizuku got hurt trying to find information for the police, for him. Just imagining the owl's bright eyes dulling, his body broken and bleeding on the ground, the pro could feel his heart rate speeding up. A small nudge brought him out of his thoughts. Mimizuku stared up at him, eyes big and watching him. The owl nudged his entire head under one of his hands, pushing up against it this time. Were owls also sensitive to emotions like cats were? Shoyuta could feel his heart rate slowing back down. Mimizuku was here. He was fine. He lightly scritched at the back of the owl's neck, the feathers soft and warm to the touch. "Be careful out there, Mimizuku," he whispered, trying to forget the vivid images of a dying bird that his brain had given him. "Your life is more important than any information you bring us." The world wasn't a nice place. Shoyuta knew that better than most. He hoped that Mimizuku wouldn't find that out the hard way. Izuku usually ignored what the people around him talked about. When he had been quirkless, he ignored a lot of what Kaken said. Ignored most of what Hisashi had said. Ignored all of what his classmates would say. But he still heard it all. He had listened to it. He just never listened to them. He had gotten very good at ignoring people. It helped him a lot when he started living as an owl, though he spent most of his time just avoiding people in general. Owl hearing really helped with that. People tended to walk and talk loudly. However, if it was quiet enough, Izuku could even hear their hearts beating. It made it easy to avoid places where people tended to gather. But it was different now. Izuku could not ignore words or people anymore, not if he wanted to find more information for Aizawa-san. It wasn't as if he purposely went looking for people to listen to. Izuku knew that would be dangerous and not something he should do if he wanted to stay hidden. It would be best if no one saw him at all. After all, Aizawa-san had told him to be careful. Izuku planned on keeping his promise. The owl found that he heard a lot, even on an average night. It really wasn't useful information for the police though, and usually had nothing to do with drags or trigger. For Izuku though, it wasn't bad. True, the information had no use to him as well, but it gave him a sense of normalcy to know things like the blueberry muffins from the bakery on the corner were really delicious, or that there was a sale on winter coats at the shopping mall. They were the sorts of things he would hear from conversations in the streets back when he was human. It made him miss being human. Izuku knew that human Izuku wouldn't be able to do this though. Human Izuku had nothing left in the world except for his yellow backpack and faded memories. Owl Izuku, on the other hand, could hunt for his own food, had a home, and could fly. Owl Izuku had Aizawa-san and Yamada-san. He couldn't let them down. If only that was as easy as it sounded though. Days had passed and he'd heard nothing even drag-related in the streets. Sure, he knew that Minamoto-san down the street from the bowling alley was getting married in the summer, and that Takahashi-san was expecting her first grandchild soon, but it really didn't help him at all. Not to say that he wasn't happy for them. He thought it was nice that their families were growing bigger. He wasn't jealous. He had Aizawa-san and Yamada-san now. Even though they didn't really know about him, the time that he spent with them was easily growing to be his most cherished parts of the night. It was getting harder and harder to push away the guilt gnawing away at his insides every time he visited them. Izuku had thought about it and he supposed this was why he wanted to help Aizawa-san so badly. It was something to make him feel less guilty about lying to their faces, just pretending to be a smart bird. Sometimes he suspected that they knew he wasn't just a plain old owl. They always treated him like he was his own person and not like a pet, always asking before even attempting any sort of contact with him. They even apologized to him if they did something he didn't like. It was nice, if not a bit disconcerting at times. They were still good and polite to him regardless. Izuku wanted any chance to help them out. Just being around them, even just sitting next to them in silence, drove his loneliness away. He couldn't help his mama anymore, she was long gone now. The days of being mama's little helper were impossible to get back. But this was a way he could help Aizawa-san. The Aizawa-san who thanked him, who invited him into his home, who treated him so kindly. The same Aizawa-san who worried about his safety despite knowing nothing else about him except that he was an owl. Izuku wished that Mama had gone to Eraserhead to ask for help that day. Maybe she would have found him with his help. Maybe she would still be here with him. It wasn't the first time Izuku had thought about telling Aizawa-san the truth, and he knew it was likely to not be the last. He just felt so guilty all the time. Guilty for not telling Aizawa-san the truth. Guilty for not hiding like his mama had said. Guilty for pretending to be someone he wasn't. Izuku hated feeling this way. This was way worse than how Kaken used to make him feel. He couldn't bring himself to regret anything he did though. It was selfish of him. All he did was take up the precious free time that pro heroes probably didn't have much of. Take up their attention that they could be spending on other, better things. Take advantage of Aizawa-san's and Yamada-san's kindness. And if Izuku had the chance to do this again, he'd make the same choices. Did that make him a bad person? He just missed being around people who liked him. People who would listen to him. People who would call his name. Being with them made him feel loved. Made him feel cared for. The problem was that he didn't want to put them in danger. Mama never told him what the danger they were in was, but Izuku knew he was a smart boy. He already had all the clues. Someone burning to death meant a fire quirk, and Hisashi had a fire quirk. It meant that Hisashi was a bad person, a villain. In all honesty, the owl didn't know what to feel about that. Izuku had never liked Hisashi and Hisashi had never really liked him in return. When the doctor had said that he was quirkless, Hisashi had made it clear that he never expected much from Izuku and that it was no surprise that even a quirk was too much to expect from him. Mama had gotten really angry with Hisashi that night, still crying after she had apologized to him about his dreams of being a hero. Mama had loved Hisashi though. But she was still dead. Burned alive. Hisashi was still out there somewhere and he was dangerous. Telling Aizawa-san the truth would put him in that same danger. Yamada-san too. Izuku just didn't know what to do except to continue what he had already been doing. Continue lying, continue hiding, and hope that maybe one day, Aizawa-san and Yamada-san would be able to forgive him. He ignored the sinking feeling that told him that expecting forgiveness after lying for so long? It wasn't reasonable. Illogical. Shoyuta was busier than he had ever been in a while. Between his nightly patrols, the trigger case reports, and contacting his actual human informants, he's barely been able to grab a few hours of rest every so often. He was exhausted. There was just so much to do and not enough hours in the day for those things to get adequately done. And they had to be adequately, if not, well done. He was not willing to compromise on the quality of his work. Heroics was a career which dealt in lives, something every pro hero was aware of. What was lost sleep compared to a life saved? Knowing that didn't stop the yawn stretching his jaw though. He got up and made his way to the kitchen, snagging his empty cup as he went. More coffee wasn't what he wanted right now, but it was what he needed if he wanted to finish going through the rest of those reports and then reply to Nedzu's email. He had been surprised that Nedzu had emailed him, though the surprise lessened when he had read it and saw that it was an invitation for him and Mimizuku to visit UA. The timing was suspicious, Shoyuta knew, but that sort of thing was what Nedzu did best. He had known that Nedzu held an interest in Mimizuku, but to know that the trust between him and the owl right now was at an all-time high? He groaned. Fing rat. As he refilled his cup and returned back to the couch, he wondered if Mimizuku would be amenable to visiting the school. It was not the first time he thought about the extent of the owl's intelligence. Did the owl know what a school was? Would the owl understand what a school was? Did animals have any sort of understanding about quirks? Nedzu was an outcast on those fronts, with high spec being such a powerful quirk. Animals with quirks were still decently rare. Did Mimizuku even know that he was different from most owls? So many questions and next to no answers. It's not as if the owl could speak the human language, but then he'd just be looking at another Nedzu. The world didn't need another Nedzu. Shoyuta huffed as he scanned through another report, only looking up when he noticed movement from the corner of his eyes. He could feel a smile twitch unbiddenly onto his lips as he stood to open the glass door for the owl. Mimizuku flew in, landing onto his stool and chirping. Ever since he had given Mimizuku the recorder, the bird had been out and about more than ever, his visits now shorter and rarer. Shoyuta had mixed feelings about that. He enjoyed Mimizuku's company when he could have it, the owl now comfortable enough with him to try to preen his hair. The other night, he had even seen Hizashi tickling under the owl's chin with his fingers still intact. Things just felt more right with Mimizuku around. The owl was a part of their little family. Fury though. It wasn't often, but Mimizuku had ended up using the tracker function multiple times. Every single one of those times had taken place during his patrol and was relatively nearby to his location. Of course he had gone to check it out. The first time it happened, he had rushed off, images of a hurt owl bleeding into his imagination. When Shoyuta had arrived, it was to a muzzled kid sitting by the alleyway, tears falling silently down his cheeks. Mimizuku was perched on the railing of a balcony, only chirping when he caught sight of him. That had been the start of Mimizuku using his tracker to report on lone children in the dark streets. It quickly escalated to being used to report petty crime and even a few villains that had been looting stores. Thankfully, it seemed that the owl remembered his previous lecture on interfering in crimes and usually stayed out of range of most weaponry and quirks, choosing to perch nearby instead. It didn't stop him from snatching away any knives that were taken out though. That just meant that Shoyuta had a pretty sizable and growing collection of knives now. The knowledge that Mimizuku was out and about more than ever because of his own request for information wasn't something that sat well with him. The owl was still young and likely impressionable despite his obvious intelligence. For him to be taking advantage of that, he didn't like it. Owls were predators of the night sky, silent and quick with both superb sight and hearing. They were essentially naturals at picking up information. With the addition of an intelligence quirk in the mix, Mimizuku was almost unfairly stacked in terms of beneficial abilities aiding his informant side job. Logic dictated that Mimizuku's help was the optimal choice. He could only hope that the owl kept safe as he did this. Before he could continue down his rabbit hole of thoughts, he could feel his pants leg being pulled at. Shoyuta blinked down at Mimizuku, who only blinked back at him after letting go of the piece of fabric in his beak. "You're going to grow up to be a little sheet," the man chuckled, a wry smile crossing his lips. "I just know it." The owl only peeped in reply before tapping the side of the recorder with a talon. "You've got something for me?" "Yes." Shoyuta was intrigued, immediately leaning forward to download what was recorded. What could it be? Could Mimizuku have actually managed to get another lead on the trigger case? Or was it something that the bird might have witnessed and wanted to share? The pro had no idea. Anything was possible. When the recording was done downloading, Shoyuta clicked on it, playing the sound file. Nothing. He clicked on it again. This time, straining his ears, he could hear a couple of low murmurs. Shoyuta had really underestimated how keen an owl's hearing was if Mimizuku could make any sense out of that. He'd have to really amp up the volume if he wanted to actually hear what was being said. "I'll have to listen to it later." Mimizuku pet his head at the laptop and looked up at him. "It's a bit too low for human ears, so I'd have to turn up the volume to listen to it now." The owl only squinted at the laptop again, and Shoyuta chuckled before switching back to his email. "You've got an invitation, by the way." The pro closed out of the report he had been reading earlier and opened up Nedzu's email to him. "I'll read it to you." To izawa.s@hmail.co.jp. From nedzu@ua.ed.jp. Subject: Invitation to UA. Dear Aizawa-kun and Mimizuku-kun. Would you like to have a spot of tea with me sometime during this weekend? I can assure you that this will be completely safe with no threats. Also, I have been upgrading UA's defenses recently. You will both have to use the main gate to gain entrance. I look forward to your response. A dog, a mouse, or a bear? I am the principal. Mimizuku looked fascinated at the email, ear tufts fluffed up and sidling even closer to look at the screen. It was the high school I graduated from. The owl looked up at him as he started speaking. Nedzu was my old hero ethics teacher. And you can see he's the principal now. He's been interested in meeting you for a while, but things have been busy recently for all of us. The owl peeped, head tilting to the side. Golden Week starts soon, so things get a bit less busier. Sighing, Shoyuta waved a hand at his unread emails. No such thing as vacations for a pro hero, but this comes as close as it can get, which is why I'm guessing Nedzu has the time for a tea party. Or Nedzu had found out about the recent surge of trust between the two of them and finally decided to stick his nose and paws into their business. He wasn't going to tell that to Mimizuku though. The owl had enough on his plate and didn't need the extra stress of knowing that a rat was watching them. Nedzu is an animal with a quirk. The pro opened up UA's website and clicked into their faculty page, tapping the topmost image with a knuckle lightly. Please don't try to eat him. I would have to actually arrest you if you tried. Mimizuku gazed at the static image and chirped, ruffling his feathers before leaning to pull at Shuta's sleeve. The pro gave him a fond look, carefully dislodging the fabric. He really didn't want to sew up any tears later. Do you want to go visit him? Yes. The answer came very quickly, with almost no pause. Shuta's eyebrows rose at that, but the man supposed the owl was just really interested in meeting another animal with a quirk. It made sense to him. Saturday is 3 days from now. Does that work for you? Yes. You'll have to come here early. Since you've never been to the school, I'll be leading you for the most part. Will you be all right with me carrying you into the school? Yes. Mimizuku chirped. He raised a clawed foot up and placed it against the pro hero's hand before looking up at him, chirping again. Shoyuta blinked back, a few seconds passing before he finally picked up on what the owl seemed to be telling him. I've got a glove for this, an expensive glove, but as long as it did what it was advertised to do, that was fine. It had surprised him when he found out the price tags on those types of specialty items, but all of the reviews had been stellar and the company itself had a good reputation. Made sense for quality products to have a corresponding price tag. Speaking of money, he had told the owl about the check passed to him from the precinct for the panned-out tip, had even explained the concept of money and spending to him, but the bird had held no real interest in it. It had taken almost half an hour of talk and nibbled fingers, but they had finally agreed on Shoyuta taking the money. It wasn't as if the pro was planning to use it for anything, but the owl didn't need to know that. If anything, it was going to be a separate fund for future medical bills if Mimizuku ever got hurt or sick. He had eventually decided to invest in a raptor glove not too long after that whole debacle. It was something he had been thinking about getting previously when he had noticed that despite Mimizuku getting comfortable enough with him to sit on his forearm a few times, he never tried climbing onto his capture weapon-covered fist even when it was offered. Shoyuta hadn't shown the glove to the owl yet, but he supposed now would be a good time to test out to see if Mimizuku would perch on it. It was the most logical way of bringing him into UA. We can test it out now actually. The pro had tried it on before at Hisashi's urging just to make sure it fit his hand, but with the whole reason he had even purchased it here, he may as well take the chance to try it out properly. I'll go grab it. He had left the glove hanging by the entryway of the apartment right next to the hook where his own support weapon hung when he bothered to even hang it up. Grabbing it and returning to the living room, the pro hoped that Mimizuku would approve of it. In a practiced motion, he had the glove pulled onto his left hand, the hide soft against his bare skin. Shoyuta made sure the owl could see the glove before holding out his hand for the examination that was bound to happen. This is a raptor glove. They're specifically made so birds like you can perch on them without harming human hands with your talons. Mimizuku didn't disappoint, hopping closer to him and butting the glove with the side of his head. He then laid a clawed foot against it, leaning in slightly before looking up at Shoyuta. I'm fine. He wiggled the fingers of the glove. Why don't you try standing on it? It's only logical to test this out before using it out in the open. The owl hooted and with a small hop and a flap of the wings, he perched on Shuta's hand. Mimizuku was hefty. The pro had previously read up on the weights of the Eurasian eagle owl species, but it still surprised him. They were known to be one of the heaviest owls. Shoyuta thought that the owl weighed just under the weight of his smaller cast iron skillet probably. Definitely easier to hold though, he mused. As Shoyuta shifted slightly, he could feel the strength of those talons even with the protection of the gloves. It was a slight pressure, nothing bad or harmful, but it was an attestation to the quality of the product that it could hold up to the grip strength of an owl. Of course, the pro knew that Mimizuku was likely not exerting all the strength he could, but he was grateful that he didn't have to worry about numb fingers later. "You like it?" Shoyuta hummed as he marveled silently at this new display of trust. "When we get to the school, this is how I'll be taking you in with me through the front gates and inside the building. I don't think flying in the corridors would be suitable given that there aren't exactly many things you can perch on in the hallways without scratching them up." "Yes. I'll make sure Nedzu has something proper for you to perch on in his office, so you won't have to sit on my hand the entire time," Shoyuta continued. "As for the journey there, you can follow me from the sky. You've got a ton of experience doing that already." Mimizuku only chirped at him. "The little sheet. Will you be all right around so many people? We'll be traveling earlier than you usually like to be active and it'll be noisy before we get to UA." The owl paused before answering with a yes. "You don't have to worry about this. If anything happens, I'll protect you, Mimizuku," Shoyuta whispered, knowing full well that the owl's keen hearing would be able to pick up whatever he was saying. "I promise." To nedzu@ua.ed.jp. From izawa.s@hmail.co.jp. Subject: Invitation to UA. Principal Nedzu. The both of us agree to your invitation. Birds. Izawa Shoyuta and Mimizuku chapter text. Izuku was very excited. He was going to visit UA today. The UA. The high school that All Might went to. The high school that Aizawa-san and Yamada-san went to. The owl almost couldn't believe it. Izuku. Getting to visit UA. It was almost beyond his wildest dreams. Except for that one dream about getting a quirk, because that actually did happen. And even better news was that a conversation he recorded and passed over to Aizawa-san might have been useful. Izuku hadn't been entirely sure it would have been good information, but he knew that the man he had seen was acting very suspicious. It was like how Kaken acted that one time he got caught punching him in the face. Even though he didn't get in trouble for it anyways. Izuku hoped that it helped with Aizawa-san's current case. The pro hero always looked so tired whenever he visited him. It made him feel bad that the man could be wasting his time spending it with him instead of using it to take a nap. Yamada-san had told him before that Aizawa-san was always more relaxed after his visits, so he hoped that he was right. He would have to try to visit more often if that was the real case, despite his guilt. Aizawa-san was such a nice person after all. He deserved all of the good things he could get. Izuku couldn't do much for him, but he'd do his best for what he could do for his favorite person. Izuku thought that his mama would agree with him. She always did tell him to treat people how he'd like to be treated himself. He was nervous too, of course. That sickly feeling was bubbling underneath his excitement and he did his best to squash it down even more. Izuku didn't like spending time out of his roost when the sun was still high in the sky. Not only was it against his own instincts, but it left him in full view of any bystanders. Aizawa-san said that he'd protect him, and it wasn't as if he didn't believe the pro-hero's words, but even Aizawa-san couldn't really protect him from being seen. The only thing really protecting him from being found was his quirk. As long as he was an owl, he was safe. And as long as he was an owl, Aizawa-san and Yamada-san would care for him. Izuku knew it was a bad thing to lie, but was it really lying when he was planning to be an owl for the rest of forever? It didn't stop his guilt, but that was something he knew he would have to continue living with. He liked the two heroes too much to stop visiting them. He didn't even want to think about spending all his time alone again. Izuku shivered slightly, feathers ruffling in the warm breeze. Aizawa-san had made their meeting with Principal Nedzu as late as he could, but it was still pretty early compared to when he usually was awake. His excitement for visiting the school had woken him up even earlier though, and he was afraid that he might oversleep if he tried to take a small nap. He had ended up arriving at the apartment before Aizawa-san had even put on proper pants. These were a bright pink that Izuku had never seen before. It was almost unreal. The owl had even tried to pull on the drawstring with his beak just to make sure he wasn't actually dreaming this up, but the hero had shooed him away from his pants. Yamada-san laughed while taking a photo of this. Izuku hadn't really heard much laughter like Yamada-san's. His mama had laughed, but it was never loud and she definitely never ended up on the floor while doing it. When Aizawa-san went to get dressed, Yamada-san pulled something out of a nearby shelf, the last of his chuckles fading into a smile. Mimizuku. He motioned Izuku over, patting the spot next to him on the couch when he sat down. Come see. The owl was curious, flying over and landing right where the pro's hand had been just a few seconds ago. Izuku blinked, recognizing it as a photo album. The kanji on the front of the cover was the same as the one back at his old home. Izuku chirped, wondering what kind of photos were in there. Maybe photos of Yue? Or was it more like Aizawa-san and Yamada-san as kids? He butted his head against Yamada-san's hand, now eager to see what was inside. Gosh, you're impatient, Zuku. Izuku looked up at the man, eyes wide. What did he say? Did he say his name? Did he say Izuku? He peeped, using his beak to pull at Yamada-san's sleeve, making the blonde man groan. Mimizuku. No pulling. Mimizuku. Aizawa-san's voice called out from down the hallway, don't pull. Izuku let go and clacked his beak in annoyance. He had only wanted Yamada-san to repeat himself. Had he heard wrong? Or was it just his nerves making him mishear? Geez, must be the cranky teenage rebellion owl stage. Yamada-san sighed, I feel more like a dad than ever now. Izuku grumbled to himself, but the sight of the still-closed photo album was enough to distract his fading ire. He tapped the album, chirping at the blonde. Yamada-san obligingly opened the photo album for him, the first photo immediately snagging his attention. Izuku could easily recognize Aizawa-san and Yamada-san in the photo. That's Yue there in the background. The pro pointed at the large building in the photo. It's hard to miss in person, but I figure it'd be helpful to at least know what it looks like. If you somehow lose show along the way, just find the big building, yeah? Yes. Izuku then chirped, tapping the photo album again. He really wanted to see more of the photos. These are photographs, Yamada-san continued, and Izuku wanted to groan. Not being able to speak like a human really was rough sometimes. You can take them with a phone or a camera and then have them printed out like this. It's like freezing a moment of time you can then revisit later on. Sho and I both have photo albums back from when we were kiddos, but this one is mostly a family one, just me and him together. The blonde flipped to the next page, showing him a photo of Aizawa-san napping in a tree's branches. Most of them are ones I took, since I'm a bigger fan of taking photos, but there are a few that he took of you in here too. Izuku peeped, looking up at the man. Did they really? Yamada-san had just said it was a family album though. They really put him in their family album? See? Here's you with a knife, Yamada-san chuckled, pointing at the photo. Izuku blinked. It really was a photo of an owl with a knife. He blinked again. It was the first time he had seen himself so clearly actually. Sure, he saw his reflection in pools of water or the windows of buildings, but it was always dark in spite of his owl vision. Figuring out what he looked like when he had meals to hunt for instead didn't make sense. Izuku wasn't surprised at all though. He looked like an owl. It was just about what he expected. And here's you getting stroked by Sho. Another page was turned, and here's another of you getting stroked by Sho. And another. Oh, this one Sho took. See? It's you looking all fluffy. And here's one where you were yawning. Oh man, some of these are great. Izuku was growing embarrassed. He really hoped that owls didn't blush or else he might just go hide under the coffee table somehow. Sure, it was a bit low and he may not even fit, but he had never been that big of a fan of direct attention anyways. Oh, here's one where you're both napping. Yamada-san's voice turned into a coo. Just look at the two of you. My sleepy boys. It was a weird feeling of both embarrassment and happiness mixing together within him. If he could cry, he knew that tears would already be falling down his cheeks with his voice already choked up. He really wanted to hug Yamada-san, but satisfied himself with a nuzzle to the cheek, careful to not poke the hero with his beak. Cute. Aizawa-san had his phone pointed at them, the movement of the shutter catching Izuku's eyes. Another photo for the album. I think this one might be the first one we have with both you and Mimizuku in it. We should get a photo with all three of us in it. The blonde grinned as he lightly nuzzled back against the owl's head. We don't have one of those yet either. Mimizuku. Aizawa-san waved a gloved hand, beckoning him as he came closer and handed his phone over to Yamada-san. Family photo? Izuku didn't tap out an answer, only hopping onto the arm of the couch and then onto Aizawa-san's hand. The dark-haired man let out a small laugh, his breath ruffling the owl's plumage. Izuku peeped in indignation, immediately starting to preen the misplaced feathers back down, even using a clawed foot to nudge them back into place. Izuku thought it was very rude that Aizawa-san would do this right after suggesting a family photo. He really didn't want to look sloppy in the photo. It was enough that they had a photo of him yawning. They didn't need one where he looked like he was just blasted by a fan. I think he wants to look pretty for the camera. Yamada-san held the phone out, the front facing them. You too good. Aizawa-san nodded, hefting his hands slightly higher up so the three of them could fit in the frame. Izuku chirped, puffing out his chest slightly, the white feathers a stark difference against all the tawny browns. Say cheese. Yamada-san smiled widely as he tapped the screen to take the photo. Aizawa-san also had a small smile on his lips. Izuku. Izuku was an owl. Izuku hoped he looked like a happy owl at least. Do you like it, Mimizuku? Yamada-san tapped into the gallery to see the photo again, showing it to the bird. If you like it, I'm gonna get like 2 of these babies printed out. Izuku tilted his head, slightly confused on why they would need 2 copies of the same photo, but tapped out a yes nonetheless. We've got a frame somewhere in a box, so I think this'll be perfect to hang up. Yamada-san handed the phone back to Aizawa-san. Just gotta find it and figure out the dimensions. You do that. The dark-haired pro slid the phone into his back pocket before sliding open one of the balcony doors. Mimizuku and I are heading off now. Gotcha. Yamada-san shot them a thumbs up and a wink before heading down the hallway. Love you. See you two later. Izuku chirped back at him before focusing back on the fading daylight of the outside. Was this really alright? Being happy with Aizawa-san and Yamada-san? It felt right. He liked this. A new family. Shoyuta was making his way to Yue. It felt a bit nostalgic even though the route he was taking was different from the one he used to take back when he still attended that school. Perhaps it was just the knowledge that he was returning back to high school. He had been tempted to make the trip shorter by taking the train, but asking Mimizuku to follow a train was just not logical. Not only was the train full of people during this time of day, but it was noisy. Shoyuta had known about the owl's distaste for noise for a while now, but the aversion to being seen was something he had only identified recently. He had thought it was some sort of animal instinct, some drive that pushed Mimizuku to avoid humans because of how dangerous they could be, but the owl was comfortable enough around people to live in the city. If he had wanted to flat out avoid humans in general, he had every opportunity to just fly off north where there were more forested lands and smaller towns. The owl was fine living around people, but didn't like people seeing him. There was a story behind that, he knew it. Now that he thought about it, Mimizuku had fled after their initial encounters with him, both that time where he had seen that silhouette against the moon and after the knife incident. He had previously established that the owl had some sort of issue with trust. It would make sense for those two things to be connected somehow. Association didn't always result in causation though, and he was wary of bringing anything up that might break the trust between him and the bird. They weren't at the stage where he could pull off a logical ruse. He might even get bitten for it. Shoyuta didn't even know if an intelligence quirk would allow Mimizuku to understand the concepts behind a logical ruse. He would assume so, but he also knew that intelligence quirks tended to vary in degree. Not every one of those quirks could result in a Nedza level of intelligence. Thankfully, it was a fact that Mimizuku was smart. However, every single article he had read on owls had stated that compared to most other species of birds, owls usually never ranked that high up on intelligence. That seemed to be the norm, even in the current quirked society. That meant that Mimizuku was an exception in terms of brains. He could understand human speech, human technology, and even replicate human etiquette. Even being able to act as an informant was beyond most animals. He was hoping that Nedzu would be able to shed some light on this. Mimizuku really was a bird of mystery. Izuku was glad that Aizawa-san made it very clear where he was heading. It also helped that he already knew what the building looked like from the photo that Yamada-san had shown him, so if he did lose Aizawa-san below in the streets, he could still try to make his way to the school. He really didn't want to lose sight of the pro-hero though. The area they were in was not one he had been in before, and he didn't want to waste Aizawa-san's or Nezu-san's time if they had to go find him if he got lost. He just wished the sun would fall faster. Aizawa-san had mentioned that it was a weekend where lots of people went on vacation and had days off, and he was definitely seeing it. Families of all sizes were together in the streets, all doing their own things. He hoped they were all heading home, so that there wasn't a chance of them seeing him later that night when he had to fly back. The sunlight did feel nice against his back, but it made him even more conscious of the fact that if one person looked up and saw him there, they'd see him. Izuku didn't know how long he had been following Aizawa-san, but he did note that less and less people appeared the further they went. Instead of buildings, there were trees now. There was much less noise here as well, reminding him of empty parks at night. Aizawa-san had stopped walking, looking around him, his eyes looking through the trees. Was he looking for him? Izuku chirped once, stepping out on a branch away from the trunk. He knew that his feathers helped him blend in pretty well, so it did make some sense to him if Aizawa-san couldn't find him at first glance. Mimizu, he blinked. I thought that I might have lost you somewhere. I really underestimated how long it'd take to get here. Izuku chirped again. Silly Aizawa-san. It wasn't his fault that so many people were around or that UA was so far away from the apartment. UA is on top of this hill, so you can go on ahead if you want. It was tempting. He didn't really like the thought of being separated from Aizawa-san when they were both so far away from their territory, but he was feeling a bit hungry from all the flying he had already done today. Izuku could hear the minute footfalls of creatures scampering about. It would be a good chance to get a snack in. Especially since he knew he'd have to fly back later. Izuku cooed and tapped out of this, before pushing himself off the branch, flapping to make his way over the trees. He wasn't as worried about people seeing him now compared to earlier, even if the sun hadn't fully fallen yet. Aizawa-san was the only person around anyways. He decided to get near the top of the hill first, making sure he had the time to spare to hunt. It would be rude to make Aizawa-san and Nezu-san wait. As he flew over the trees, Izuku made sure to keep an eye on the road stretching up the hill. Remembering landmarks was important. This was the first time he had even left his territory ever since he had first arrived there. If he couldn't get back, it was practically giving up on his territory. Izuku did think the forest was nice though. There were a lot of trees full of leaves and branches. It probably would have made a good home for him if he didn't already know that it surrounded UA and had lots of teachers and students going there all the time. He would have definitely been seen eventually even if he only came out during nighttime. It was probably hard to sneak around pro-heroes. It didn't take long for him to reach the top of the hill, the school building impossible to miss. Izuku took a moment to admire the building. It looked much bigger in person than it did in the photograph. He was still nervous, yeah, but who wouldn't be? This was UA, the top hero school in the country. Izuku quickly retreated back into the forest, intent on hunting something down. Hunting in a forest was different from hunting in the city. There were just so many trees and he had to be careful that he didn't clip himself on branches while maneuvering. It didn't take long for him to find something to sate his appetite, quickly pouncing upon and then gulping the critter down. He didn't stay long on the ground, taking back to the sky once he had finished eating, wings open to catch an updraft back to the top. Landing onto a branch in view of the road and the school entrance, Izuku waited. As the minutes passed, the owl nervously nibbled at his toes, making sure no animal bits were left on his talons. Aizawa-san had mentioned that Nezu-san was an animal with a quirk after all. And to try to not eat him. The picture of Nezu-san on the website did kind of look like a rat, so it was understandable. It really was best that Izuku ate before the meeting. Then there would be no temptation to even try, hopefully. Aizawa-san appeared not too long after, much to Izuku's delight, a small coo leaving his beak. The pro looked up at the sound, black eyes meeting green. Mimizuku, you ready? He beckoned with his gloved hand, get down here. Izuku obliged, hopping off his perch and landing safely onto Aizawa-san's fist, his talons clutching at but not piercing through the glove. He tapped once for a yes, before chirping, his excitement bleeding through his nervousness. Aizawa-san's dark eyes looked amused before fading back down into its usual neutral state. Turning, the pro made his way closer to the entrance, holding down a small button by the gate, a small light flashing on. Aizawa Shoyuta and Mimizuku here for a meeting with Principal Nedzu. Baby! Look at him. 032323. Fluffiest boy to ever floof. He's molting. 041423. Tired boy. Dash 042423. This is our son. Dash 050123. Aizawa Shoyuta did not expect the first visit back to his old high school after he graduated would involve his own free will and an owl. He had expected it might involve bribes from Hizashi or Nemuri, or maybe some case that Nedzu had requested him for, but nothing like this. He was careful to not show any of his wariness with his expressions. Mimizuku had picked up on his emotions more than a few times over the months, and having to bring an uppity owl to a meeting with a dog-mouse-bear creature sounded like an utter train. Mimizuku did seem interested in the school itself at least, barely sparing Shoyuta any of his attention. Instead, the owl was bobbing and turning his head, eyes wide at the main building. Like a kid at a candy store, Shoyuta mused, watching him fondly. He wasn't sure he could understand the type of wonder the owl was going through right now, but it reminded him of his own first day of high school. Just the experience of walking through the front gates and then to the entrance, all the while with the towering school looming over everything. It was a pity that Hanami season was already over for the year. That would have been the cherry on top of the figurative sundae. Mimizuku was even more vocal than he usually was, peeps, chirps, and even the occasional whistle leaving his beak. Shoyuta could only indulge him, speaking in a low voice about whatever his eyes met, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hallways. That's the front desk. Hizashi took a selfie laying down on it once when the secretary went to refill her coffee. That's the auditorium. Too many speeches. I can't even imagine how long they are now since Nedzu is the principal. Cafeteria. Didn't really spend that much time in there. I ate on the roof. That's the room for 1C, the homeroom I started in. I didn't spend too long in there either. 1A, Hizashi's homeroom back during first year. I joined this class after I won the sports festival. Teacher's lounge. Probably where the coffee machine is. It's only logical. And that's the principal's office. Only been in there once, and that was when my transfer to the hero course was being finalized. Shoyuta stopped there, the door in front of them. He would admit he was just a bit nervous, but who wouldn't be? Meeting up with his old teacher who was now principal? Not exactly what he signed up for when he decided to go into heroics. But Nedzu was the premier expert in animals with quirks, to the surprise of no one, so his fate was sealed the very moment that Mimizuku had snatched that knife away from that thug where he could see it. He didn't regret anything about his relationship with the owl though, the avian proving to be extremely lovable and affectionate underneath the veneer of mistrust. Mimizuku, the owl blinked at him at the sound of his name. You ready to meet him? Yes. Shoyuta nodded and steeled himself, bringing his unloved hand up to knock the door, blinking when it opened by itself right as his knuckle brushed against it. Mimizuka didn't seem surprised, only swiveling his head to look at the hinges. Typical Nedzu-like thing to do. Rat should be glad that the owl didn't scream bloody murder instead. He strode in, turning to close the door behind him when it closed by itself. Should have expected that too. Mimizuku peeped, his ear tufts fluffing up, eyes trained on a long white tail swaying from behind the large desk in the room. Am I a mouse? A dog? A bear? A familiar chipper voice rang out while two white paws propped themselves up onto the chair. 2 ears and beady black eyes then followed. I'm the principal of Nedzu. Shoyuta wanted to go home already. Izuku was having a wonderful time. From the walk to the principal's office, to Aizawa-san's descriptions of places they passed, everything so far had been so cool. And now they were meeting Nedzu-san. While Izuku had known what the principal looked like, the tail, of all things, had caught him by surprise. It made him think of a long wiggly worm. Honestly, he was just glad that he had no sudden urge of hunger. Plus the description of a mouse dog bear was confusing him enough. Please, take a seat. A paw gestured at the empty seat in front of the desk and then to a large tree branch. As for Mimizuhin, I have a perch ready for you. Aizawa-san sat, lifting the hand that Izuku was standing on closer to the branch, making the distance for him to cross easily done with a small hop. It was a sturdy branch, Izuku noted, his talons digging into the wood. Must have come from a really big tree. Aizawa-kun, tea? Delicate teacups had been already filled, steam still rising from the lightly colored liquid. Izuku couldn't exactly smell it, but he was sure it smelled nice. Thanks, Aizawa-san nodded, ignoring the paw pointing out the milk and sugar available and instead swishing the tea in the cup, breathing in the aroma. Chamomile? Yes. Nezu-san seemed delighted, ears pricked up and tail wagging. A recent purchase that I've been very much enjoying. The two sipped their tea in unison. Izuku watched while remembering Aizawa-san telling him that Nezu-san was his old teacher. This must have been something they did often back then. Like a tradition. Let's cut to the chase. The man sighed, placing his cup back onto its saucer. What's your reasoning behind calling this meeting? Izuku perked up. He was curious about that as well. While he had been enjoying his visit so far, it did seem odd to him that he got invited along with Aizawa-san. Why curiosity, of course. Izuku could see the minute twitch of the man's eyebrow. It's not often that I meet someone like Mimizuku after all. Aizawa-san only sighed. Izuku, who had heard many of the pro-heroes' sighs, recognized it as the one that meant, of course, I don't know why I would have thought otherwise. He hooted lowly, trying to mimic a laugh, the sound coming out as a stuttered "you." The white creature then turned towards him, teeth bared in what Izuku figured might be glee. While Izuku had always been very observant, the ability even strengthened with the enhanced senses of his quirk, he had a hard time figuring out what the principle of UA could be trying to express. Yamada-san was usually very open about his feelings. Aizawa-san didn't show them as much or as often, but Izuku had spent so much time with the man that he was getting very good at picking out the subtle undertones of his moods. Was it lot harder to understand. It was probably because he was an animal, Izuku reasoned to himself. He hunted for his prey every night, but he rarely studied how they acted. He usually struck too quickly for anything like that and his hunger took precedence. His eyes also caught sight of the scar crossing over one of those black eyes. Izuku didn't really know much about Nezu-san's past or hero career, but he hoped that it wasn't caused by an owl like him. That would be awkward. Mimizuku-kun. His furry head dipped into a shallow bow. I am Nezu, principal of U.A High School. It is a pleasure to finally meet you. Izuku blinked, chirping and bowing back in return. If anything, those manners that his mama instilled into him still held strong, the bow coming naturally to him. He tapped out a yes, and turned to the one human in the room, hoping he'd translate. Aizawa-san sighed again. This one meant, of course I will. Mimizuku agrees on it being a pleasure to meet you, the man grumbled out, and before you ask, Mimizuku knows he can tap a certain amount of times for specific replies. Once for yes, and twice for no. Those are the two that only really apply here. Izuku tapped yes again, ear tufts irked. While he was usually much more wary of meeting new people nowadays, Nezu-san didn't set off his instincts much. Even meeting Yamada-san at first made his feathers ruffle, his loud voice and tall hair instantly making him flare up in response. On the other hand, Nezu-san looked soft and shiny, and while he was bigger than the rats that Izuku hunted, he wasn't that much bigger than Izuku. Thank you, Aizawa-kun. Nezu-san clapped his paws together once, twice, before pulling out a pile of cards from a drawer. However, I have already prepared a method of communication. The cards were fanned out, words and pictures printed on each of them. They reminded Izuku of the posters that hung on his daycare walls that taught them colors or food groups. He still felt a bit bad that he hadn't had any fruits or vegetables in so long. Mama would have been so upset with him for having meat for every single meal. He did try to eat a leaf once, but he couldn't get himself to swallow it. Maybe veggies just weren't for owls. He could read some of the cards, but it had been a long time since he had actually practiced his reading. The pictures there were much more helpful. The owl examined the cards carefully as they were put down one by one on the desk, none of them overlapping with one another. Aizawa-san looked interested as well, his eyes also scanning the cards before looking over at him. Izuku chirped back. He thought it might be fun to be able to express himself other than using yes or no questions for once. "Allow me to start, Mimizvan." Both his and Aizawa-san's gaze returned to the principal and then to the desk. "How was your journey to Udare? Feel free to choose any of these cards as descriptors." Izuku already knew which cards he wanted to pick for. Answering this specific question, he hopped off of his perch and onto the desk, talons clicking against the wood. Wondering if he should try to pick up the cards with his beak, he quickly decided against that when he ended up chasing the card on the desk for a few seconds, not even managing to pick it up due to its slippery surface. He ended up using a talon to tap the cards, being careful to not slide them over the edge of the desk. Sunny, Loud, and City were what he ended up choosing. Nedzu-san seemed pleased at his reply, continuing to ask him questions about what he thought of you, big, hero, school, and what he thought of Aizawa-san even. Tall, quiet, hero. Honestly, there weren't enough words that Izuku could choose to describe Aizawa-san. To Izuku, the pro-hero was not only just any hero, he was Izuku's hero. He tapped the hero card a few more times to try to make it clear. He continued looking over the cards, determined to find more words he could label Aizawa-san with. Eraser and head were quickly tapped, with scarf also chosen after a moment of thought. Eraserhead scarf was too cool to not be included. It also made for a surprisingly good nest to sit in. He had spent many evenings sitting in the piled scarf next to Aizawa-san, dozing off in the soft and warm material with Yamada-san talking on the radio. When he thought he had finished going through all the cards on the desk, he noticed one he had missed. It was half covered by another card. Izuku figured he might have shifted them over each other when he was shuffling around to tap at cards, so he nudged the top card away, revealing the last card. His talon reached out, tapping the card twice before he could even think it through. Father. It was true, wasn't it? It hurt for his mama to be gone. He still missed her. But Aizawa-san meant so much more to him than just a hero or a friend now. It was weird. Hisashi had never really been like how Aizawa-san was to him. He could hear the rustle of a sleeve from behind him. Izuku turned, intercepting the fingers with his head, nudging against them. Aizawa-san chuckled, giving his head a few short strokes. A father? Well, if you don't mind that I'm not an owl, I don't see why not. Izuku peeped at him, before stepping away to tap bird and sun. That you are. Aizawa-san had an amused look on his face, to Hisashi too. He felt warm, like he had just eaten a large bowl of homemade katsudon. His memories of what it tasted like were all gone by now, but he never quite forgot how it made him feel inside. Izuku continued answering questions with a new vigor, eager to show off what else he knew. It was going well, and Nedzu-san seemed to enjoy asking him questions. He also seemed to enjoy going off into tangents. Izuku didn't mind that at all, more than happy to listen to the impromptu lesson on how animals adapted to living in the city. It was like being back in daycare again. Breering. Izuku startled slightly as the shrill sound went off, swiveling his head to see Aizawa and taking his phone out with a small grimace on his face. He stood, a flash of surprise crossing his eyes. I need to take this. He made his way to the door, calling behind him, Be good, Mimizuku. Ruffling his feathers, Izuku only turned his attention back to the principal. You are a very good child from what I can tell so far, Mimizu-kun. Nedzu-san chuckled to himself. I wonder why Aizawa-kun would think you would act otherwise. Izuku peeped indignantly, clacking his beak as well. He was always good. Well, he tried his best to be good and that had to count for something. Nedzu-san only laughed at his actions, tea almost spilling from his cup. Izuku chirped in surprise, unsure how to react to this, but before he could do anything, Nedzu-san stopped to pour a new cup of tea, his smile not leaving his face. Well, enough of that. We can continue the lesson at a later date perhaps. Nedzu-san took a sip of tea, his ears wiggling in what seemed to be delight. It has been a while since I've had such a rapt audience. Perhaps on your next visit, we can discuss more. You seem very bright and I'd be more than happy to meet with you again. Izuku tapped out, yes, extremely pleased with himself and cooing in agreement. Meeting with Nedzin had been so fun so far. And while he loved spending time with Aizawa-san and Yamada-san, he didn't exactly want to get to know more people. It was dangerous. Really. Nedza-san was only the third person he had actually met since starting his owl life, but so far, it was going really well. Maybe meeting others was okay, as long as they thought he was just an owl. How about one last question to finish this off? A gesture at the closed door. I have a feeling that Aizawa-kun will have to leave soon. Izuku blinked in surprise, but tapped out a yes, wondering how Nedzu-san even figured out something like that. He tilted his head. He couldn't even hear anything from behind the door besides some murmurs. Tell me, Mimizuka-kun, what do you know of Aizawa-kun's quirk? An easy question. Izuku had seen him use it on patrols and even at home on Hizashi-san. It was a pretty cool quirk. It reminded him of how he could puff out his feathers and spread his wings to scare others away. Aizawa-san managed to scare people so badly that they stopped using their quirk. Eyes and red were the first two he tapped. After some quick consideration, hair and up were also chosen. For the final card, he went for scary. Izuku wished that he could write about quirks in his notebook again, before pushing that thought away. Putting down what he knew about Aizawa-san's quirk would have been fun, but it wasn't something he could do anymore now. A small click caught his attention. Head turning to see the pro-hero return to the room, the tired look back on his face. He was immediately concerned. Did this have to do with the phone call from earlier? Sensei, we have to go. Aizawa-san began, already beckoning to him with a finger. Mimisusu, come on. Izuku pushed off the desk carefully, a slight flap of his wings allowing him to land right onto Aizawa-san's glove. Sorry for the suddenness of this. He bowed. Izuku also quickly bowed right after, following his lead. Thanks for the invite. And the tea. It's no problem. The job of a pro-hero never waits after all. Nedza-san waved a paw at them. It was a pleasure seeing you again, Aizawa-kun. And it was a pleasure meeting you, Mimizuka-kun. Perhaps you will have some tea with me next time we meet. We'll see each other again, I'm sure. Izuku quickly nodded before Aizawa-san did, the man quickly making his way out of the room, his long legs taking them down the hallways and out the front doors. Were owls allowed to have tea? He didn't know about that. Izuku watched the pro-hero carefully for any signs of bad news. He really hoped that Aizawa-san hadn't gotten bad news on the phone. What could have been so important that they had to leave in such a hurry? It wasn't until they were halfway down the hill that the man spoke up. That information you passed on to me just got corroborated by another source. It's something big. Izuku chirped in surprise. So it was good news? We might finally be seeing the end of this case here in Mizudafu. Izuku hoped so. I'm going to be heading straight to the precinct from here. Can you make it back home on your own? Yes. All right then. Off you go, Mimizuku. And Izuku jumped, taking off into the dark sky. He still heard Aizawa-san's whisper from behind him. Stay safe. It was a promise. He would.